Okay, hey Pentester Academy. My name is Joe McCrae. My good friend Vivek Ramachandran asked me to make a set of videos for you guys. I'm not going to do all the bio and all that good stuff. If you don't know me, well, I'm really not that famous anyway. But let's just get started. My idea behind this was to create a video series designed to help you learn the entire process of penetration testing. Don't get me wrong, we're going to do technical stuff too. So I don't want you to think that we're not going to do technical stuff. But the big thing that I'm hoping for here is to provide you with the blueprint to perform real penetration tests for your clients. So we're going to have everything from the statement of works, the scoping documentation. We're going to move into the next section. We'll be doing the passive reconnaissance. The section after that with the external scanning, then the internal scanning, then the application security scanning. We're going to cover all of the stuff, and then we'll move into exploitation, and then we'll move into report writing, documentation. We'll wrap up the whole kit and caboodle, so that you can perform penetration tests effectively. Let's get started. Okay, so what we want to start with is the process involved. So the process involved for penetration testing is going to be heavily dependent upon where you work. So let's just dive right into that. We'll figure out where you work and how that drives the process. We'll outline the process, and then we'll give you the templates so that you can start doing the process yourself. So the first thing is you may work in a couple of places, right? So you may work as an internal penetration tester. So if you work as an internal penetration tester, you're generally what's going to be called like a security architect, security analyst, security engineer. You're going to get those types of titles, and you're going to be performing security assessments internally, trying to help your internal teams improve their security posture. You may also be working as a consultant. Now, if you're working as a consultant with a firm, whether it's one of the big firms like a Big Four, whether it's what's considered a technology firm like IBM, HP, something like that, right? So your first tier is going to be the Big Four. Your next tier is going to be the technology firms. Then your third tier is going to be what we call the boutique firms, right? These little firms. Your IO Active, your Intrepidus Group, those types of guys, Montezano, Rapid7, where I used to work, those different types of companies. Those are boutique firms, right? You may be working in a firm, or you literally may be starting your own. So you're not even at the level of boutique. It's just you, or maybe you and a partner, right? So we're going to try to figure out where you work and then drive the process based on that. Okay. Now, for the purpose of this video, we're going to base everything as if you are a consultant. Now, like I said before, an internal penetration tester, you're going to be doing penetration tests based on company needs. You're probably not going to be called a penetration tester by title. You're probably going to be called something like security analyst, security engineer, security architect, security evangelist. They're going to give you all kinds of names, but they're usually not going to call you the ethical hacker, the penetration tester, or anything like that. You're just the security guy who works at this company. But that doesn't mean you don't do pen testing. In a lot of cases, some of those guys do a lot of pen testing. Okay, now like I said, we're basing this whole segment on the thought process that you are working as a consultant. You're working for a consulting firm, a boutique firm, or you're starting your own. That's the where we're coming from for this. Okay, so types of penetration testing that you're going to be performing is going to be heavily based on your client base. So you're going to hear me say client vertical in this case. So maybe your client vertical is the financials. So if your financials are the customer, if the financials are the customer base that you service, you're probably going to do a lot of application security, a lot of web app, a lot of mobile app, a lot of REST API stuff, single page applications, Node.js, AngularJS, that kind of stuff. If, let's say, your customer base are retailers, web retailers, you're probably going to do a lot of web app stuff, right? So Definitely the single page application stuff like I talked about, definitely a lot of web app. That was the background that I did when I worked at Rapid7. We did a lot of retailers, so we had to deal with something called PCI, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS. So we did a lot of retailers, tons and tons of retailers, online retail store type places. We did a boatload of that. You may be dealing with medical. So if you're dealing with a lot of medical stuff, you'll be dealing with a regulatory compliance regulation called HIPAA, HIPAA, right? So your health information is what you're trying to safeguard. Now, people who do a lot of HIPAA stuff tend to do a lot of network stuff as opposed to the application stuff I just talked about. Right? So if you're a consultant and you consult at a lot of hospitals, regional medical centers, that kind of stuff, a lot of what you're going to be doing is a ton of network stuff. So that won't be the burp suite, tamper data, web app stuff I was just talking about with the financials and the retailers. That's going to be a whole lot more in that Metasploit, that kind of stuff, right? So your hospitals, your federal government stuff, so maybe you're a consultant to the government. Those guys, they're kind of lagging in the application space. You'll find yourself doing a ton of network penetration testing for those clients. If you're a customer who handles DoD, Department of Defense, same thing, you'll be doing a lot of network stuff. So yeah, that's pretty good. Education's another good one. I would say hybrid, but definitely more on the network side for education. Okay, same thing. Now, these jobs generally aren't titled penetration tester or ethical hacker. They may be, but very rarely. Generally, you're going to be called IT security consultant, information system security auditor. You're going to get those types of titles. Trying to represent yourself as a consultant, as an auditor, as an assessor, right? IT security assessor, infosec assessor. You get those types of job titles. Okay, so what's the process? The process is going to be how we take how we go from initial contact all the way to actually performing the penetration test and giving the final report. So that's going to be a scoping call. That's going to be providing the customer with a statement of work. That's going to be doing passive reconnaissance. That's going to be doing active scanning, target enumeration, vulnerability identification, vulnerability exploitation, and then actually documenting the project and closing the whole thing up. So let's see if we can jump into that scoping call. Now, your customer contacts you, however it is they contact you. So the customer wants to engage with you. The customer saying, hey, I think I'd like to work with you. I'm not sure yet, but I think I'd like to work with you. So generally what we do is we have what's called a scoping call. Now, before we even do that scoping call, we usually get the customer to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So let's say you've engaged with me. You said, hey, Mr. McCray, I see that you own a company called Strategic Security. I'd like to have you perform a penetration test for my company. I'd say, great, Mr. Customer, pleasure to meet you. Hey, I tell you what, would you like us to sign a non-disclosure agreement right now? I have one. Unless you have one that you'd like for me to use, let's sign this non-disclosure agreement right now. That way we can just have both of us know that I'm going to be very respectful with your confidential data, and I'm not going to share it with anybody, right? So you want to put the customer at ease, let them know that you're going to safeguard their data appropriately. And this is even before the customer starts to tell you about his network. So before he even starts to go, hey, I've got 20 servers, X many endpoints, I've got this, I've got that, and this is what I'm concerned about, before you even have the discussion, you want to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Okay, now immediately after getting that non-disclosure agreement signed, we want to move into the scoping call. So the scoping call is where we're going to say, all right, now that we've got this non-disclosure agreement signed, let's see if we can figure out how I can help you. What are you looking for? How am I going to give you what you want? So I gave you a link in these slides And I really like this. See how it says 13 critical questions to ask your client when scoping learning development engagement. And I know it's not necessarily a learning development engagement, but the questions are still the same, right? So what's the business problem you're trying to solve? So before I can even perform a penetration test, I really need to know, why do you need one? Do you need one for regulatory compliance? Do you need one because you've had a breach and you're really trying to ensure that you don't get breached again? Do you need one because you've got legacy equipment that you're trying to get rid of in your environment and you need external validation so you can prove to your customer that, prove to your boss that, we need to get rid of these servers? These are all valid reasons, right? What does success look like? After we're done with this, what are you going to want so that I know you're happy, right? What are you going to want? How am I going to make sure that I know you're happy at the end of this engagement? Whether, like I said, it's a compliance report, something that you're going to give the auditor to show due diligence, whether it's something to validate that you should not suffer the same type of breach that you just suffered, whether it's something that shows these legacy systems do need to be removed from the environment and replaced with newer systems because of these reasons, right? To validate what you're already saying, what does that look like? How do I know you're going to be happy? Let me make sure that I can do that. And then who's the business group that wants this done? And I know that really doesn't sound like that's what you would be asking. Believe it or not, it really is. So just as much as I want to know why, I want to know who. So if I can understand why you're asking this, who's asking this, I can make sure that, okay, that customer, I know they claim they need this, but they're also going to need this. Here's why. Okay, who are the primary audiences? Who needs to know this information once we're done? Okay, how important is tracking and recording of the actual process? So while we're doing all these steps, how important is it that we have complete documentation throughout the entire process? And you're going to find that some customers, like my legal customers, I've got some law firms that want a lot of time tracking. I've got a couple of other customers that want extremely verbose tracking of the entire project, specifically because they've had issues with previous consultants doing damage in the network. These are things you want to know, okay? Okay, and again, how flexible are you with the structure, the approach, creativity, of this entire program? Now, again, I know they're talking about learning, but the context is still the same for security assessments. Do you want this to be an extremely rigid thing where we're only allowed to do certain types of testing, right? Or are we really allowed to just kind of, hey, if I see this, go that way, okay? The big thing here with all these types of questions, and you want to ask not just these questions, but technical questions about the engagement, is figure out what they're trying to solve. Do they need compliance? Do they need to show due diligence for an upcoming audit? Are they dealing with a breach? Do they have budgetary considerations? In other words, they want to use the security assessment so that they can chart, right, their budget for the upcoming years, what they want to spend on security products. The strategic direction is what that is. Why do you need this? How do I help you? That's the real purpose of the scoping call. And then once I know those things, I want to produce a statement of work. Now, the statement of work details what type of assessment you're going to get. Are you going to get an external security assessment, right? An internal security assessment. External, I'm from the outside, scanning and attacking your company from the outside. This is representing the external hacker threat. Internal, I'm on the internal network, attacking your network from the inside. This is representing the insider threat. Do you want me to perform a wireless security assessment? In other words, assess all of your wireless devices and your wireless infrastructure. Can a person attack your wireless infrastructure? Can he utilize your wireless infrastructure to do things it's not designed to do? All that kind of stuff. Physical security. Do you want me to see if I can break into the building? Do you want me to see if I can gain access to critical areas of your environment, right? PCI or any other type of regulatory gap analysis. How far away are you from being compliant with whatever that particular regulation is? Or do you need a white box assessment or a black box assessment? A white box assessment is more of an audit. So effectively what you're trying to do here is you're trying to say, okay, we're going to go into the environment. You're going to give me all the usernames and passwords for everything. The routers, the servers, the switches, the laptops, the desktops, everything. And we're going to sit down, you, me, and your admins, we're going to sit down and we're going to go line by line through all the configuration files. We're going to go through all your asset management, all your documentation, and we're going to build this out and validate that it is as good as it should be, right? That's white box. That's you giving me as much information as possible about the target environment. That's white box. Now, black box is the opposite. It's you trying to give me as little information as possible for me to perform this security assessment. So here you are, you're not giving me a lot of information to work with here. So I have to see how much I can discover through my hacking process, right? And maybe that's what you're trying to learn. If you're new, you're probably going to want a white box assessment because you're going to want as much training, you're going to want as much information to really kind of help you build a robust program. If you've been doing a lot of security work for several years in your environment, I'm talking as a customer, if you've been doing a lot of security work, you've been having a lot of security consultants come in every year, you've been getting penetration tests every year, now it's time to see how well you've done and try a black box assessment. So you got to understand the differences between the two. This is why it's such a big deal to do the scoping call, so we can figure out where the customer is, what's he trying to solve, how do we help him. So if we understand that, now we can say, all right, Mr. Customer, you're really going to need a white box security assessment for the things that you're looking at doing. Okay, now this link down here, I gave you an example of an SOW. This isn't mine, but one was found out there when I was doing some Googling. Maybe in a later video series, I'll put together something where you guys can see all my sample docs. Okay, let's stop there, and then we'll come back and we'll do passive recon. Okay, welcome back, Pentester Academy. Let's start the next segment. The next segment is going to be called Passive Recon. We just finished the entire process from the scoping call to the SOW. Now it's actually time for us to start work. So we're going to start Passive Recon. So with Passive Recon, the idea is just for us to gain as much information as we can about the target network before we actually launch any active attacks. Now, what I like to tell people with Passive Recon is what you're looking for here is anything I can learn about the target without actually giving up my IP address. Now, I know there's plenty of other definitions, but this is the definition I like to give. So in other words, anything that I can do that's passive, they shouldn't know who I am when I'm doing passive recon, right? The target customer should not know that I'm trying to learn as much as I can about them. So we're going to go through a couple of other names that people call passive recon because sometimes there's some confusion. Passive recon sites, passive recon tools. Let's get started. Okay, the first thing that you're going to run into is sometimes passive recon is called a couple of different names. Things like footprinting, things like data mining, recon. Some people literally just call it recon. And then depending on where you work, OSINT. OSINT is open source intelligence. Now, for those of us like myself who came out of the DoD community, I came out of the Department of Defense, you're going to find that a lot of us use these terms like OSINT, SIGINT, signal intelligence, HUMINT, human intelligence, right? So these are people, these are terms that people in that world use to try to describe how we gather information. Now, for us, there's a big difference between data and intel. Data is just disparate pieces of information that I can collect. Intel is multiple pieces of data that are actionable. or vetted from multiple sources, right? So two or three things, two or three pieces of information are telling me that this fact is true, that's more trusted than one piece of information over here telling me that that is true. That's one way to look at intel. Another way to look at intel is actionable, right? I learned these three, four things, and based on these three, four things, I can do something with that information. I now know who this is. I now know, who it is that's trying to do whatever bad thing it is to me, or I know who this is that's trying to do whatever this bad thing to someone else, and I can take action on that information, right? So a couple of different ways that you look at intel, but the process is still the same. We need to gather as much information as possible in a passive manner. Think about it like you're trying to break into a bank. You want to case the joint first. You don't want to just run in there and try to rob the place. You want to learn everything about it, delivery schedules, security systems, employees that work there, anything that you can learn about the place so that you can formulate an attack plan. Okay, now there's a couple of websites that I like to use when I'm doing my OSINT. And sometimes it kind of blows people away when I say these. I'm like, Google, Wikipedia, they look at me like Google and Wikipedia. And I'm like, yeah, Google and Wikipedia. So Google's kind of obvious, and we'll do a lot more with Google in the next segment. But suffice to say, let's just start with Wikipedia. So let's say who I'm attacking is Chase. So I'm going to go after Chase.com, which is a large bank. So I'll go after Chase. And the first thing that I like to do is see if Chase has a Wikipedia page. So I want to jump down and go, oh, okay, Chase has a Wikipedia page. Let's see what I can learn about Chase. So I jump over here and I go, oh, well, that's pretty interesting. Look at there, right? Looks like they're a pretty decent sized bank, right? $71 billion in revenue. Looks like they do about a net income of $14 billion a year, right? 188,000 employees, right? Yeah, not too bad. Okay. Looks like they're a subsidiary of JP Morgan Chase, so I'll definitely go check them out. Okay, so I jumped over here and we now see it's not Chase, it's JP Morgan Chase. Okay, big thing that we want to know here, they're publicly traded. Excuse me. So for me, I always want to know, hey, are they public or private? If they're publicly traded, they're on the NASDAQ or something like that, right? This is a big deal because they're going to have information that they're required to disclose by law. So we can see that they're publicly traded. This information that they're going to be required to disclose is going to be like shareholder information, revenue, tax information, location information, where they're geographically located and headquartered, and all kinds of stuff that they're just required to disclose by law. So it's not that you can't get this information on a privately held company, but man, publicly traded companies just have so much more information that they're required to disclose. Okay, so we start scrolling down through here. I like to read like their history. I like to know things like who have they partnered with? Who have they bought? Do they have any mergers and acquisitions? So for me, knowing things like mergers and acquisitions, like the history is important, but I love to look for mergers and acquisitions and subsidiaries. This for me is huge. So let's say, for example, Bear Stearns, Bank One, you're looking at this kind of stuff as you're seeing JP Morgan merged with Bank One, right? I always want to know stuff like that, right? They merged with Bear Stearns. I always want to know stuff like this, okay? They merged with Washington Mutual, right? Oh, it looks like they bought them. So they bought Washington Mutual. This is all stuff that I really like knowing. And right here, look at there. Collegiate Funding Services, Lightyear Capital, right? Bank of New York, right? Climate Cares, another company that they bought. Now, why am I such a freak over this stuff? You see how they've got this huge acquisition history chart? See that? where they break down everybody that they've bought over the years, right? This, for me, is huge. Okay, the reason that I'm such a freak for this kind of information is when you have networks that are merging, people tend to lower security settings so that these two different business entities can slowly become one business entity. So you've got business entity A and business entity B who don't know each other. They're now starting to learn each other. So they end up having lower security settings so that they can share information. So if you call, from one organization to the other organization pretending to be this organization, these guys over here don't really know them yet. So now this process, you would think this is fast. It's not. This process takes years. When let's say when Wells Fargo acquired Wachovia, that network merger was probably a clean 3-4 years before those networks became one solid network. For years, dissimilar systems, right? Think about U.S. West, not U.S. West, Delta, American Airlines and U.S. Airways. That merger is taking years. United and Continental, these mergers are taking years. Dissimilar systems still not talking. And it causes all kinds of havoc because these two different entities have to constantly keep lowering settings until they finally start learning each other. All of that. Great place to look for stuff. It also helps you figure out where stuff is. So let's say, back office processing is all done out of New Jersey, and that's because this bank acquired an investment bank in New Jersey, right? So even though all these guys are Windows systems in Atlanta, all their New Jersey stuff, because it's the old company that they acquired, is still Linux, right? These are the types of things, or still SCO Unix as an example. These are the types of things you run into because as you can learn about these different entities, you can learn about the problems that they've had, the mergers, the acquisitions, the terminations, who got fired. You can look at old job recs to see types of technologies that people used in those disparate locations. There's all kinds of stuff that you can learn. So for me, this is huge. And I know you can see I'm really excited about this, but I really dig into this stuff. There's just so much information. Now, don't disregard even all the negative information. Look at all this criminal justice stuff, unfair lending practices, unfair hiring practices, fraud, all kinds of stuff that they've been accused of. This is great for social engineering. You can call pretending to be a disgruntled employee. You can go out to the smoking area, pretending to be a disgruntled employee from a different department and say something like, hey, I think I'm going to lose my job because there's layoffs that are happening. Well, about the fraud that they had last week, with the da-da-da-da-da-da happened. That was my boss. Well, when you're at the smoking area and you say something like that, what does everybody else do? Everybody else nods their head and kind of waits their turn, and then they start to say that kind of stuff, and they start spilling all kinds of information that can be really, really, really helpful. So Wikipedia, great starting place. Next up, robtex. Now this is more on the technical side. So let's say I go to robtex.com. So here I am, I'm on robtex.com. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for Chase Bank. So I'll go for chase.com. And now you'll see how it pushes you to this link here, right? Now, if you look at this, do you see how it says, okay, Chase.com uses these IP addresses. So you get the list of all the IP addresses that they use. You get their DNS servers. Here's their DNS servers. Here's their mail servers. See there? Okay. Here's all their DNS records, their name server record, their start of authority record, their MX record, that's their email. Here's their primary A records, right? Okay. Now we can start getting into this. You're going to see that they got all kinds of other goodies. So let's say I jump on the analysis side. And let's jump on the graph. And you're going to see that you can get a map of their network infrastructure. Okay. Now, this is their external routed network infrastructure. What's going to happen is you're going to see how it maps to what's called autonomous system numbers, right? So you can figure out how data routes in and out of this, and you can see if they have redundant gateways. You can see all kinds of stuff, right? See, it's Chase Code North. Maybe they've got some colos. Looks like they do have colos. You can see how they push something through Message Labs. That's where their email is hosted from, right? Looks here like they're using Prolexic, right? So there's their load balancing company. Prolexic just got acquired by Akamai. So this is great. You can start figuring out how this infrastructure works and where traffic is routed. So you can start to look for vulnerabilities. You can start to look for trust relationships between entities, right? So if they've got dissimilar business entities or their trust relationships, maybe you can't break into this one, but you can break into this one and you can jump from one to the other. This is how you learn all this stuff, right? There's just so much information here. I really think this is just like a little gold mine of this kind of stuff. Okay, the next one I want to show you guys is called Netcraft. So Netcraft, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, and the link you're going to go to is toolbar.netcraft.com/site_report. toolbar.netcraft.com/site_report. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to throw chase.com in here. There we go. So can you see here how it gives you, okay, here's the net block owner. You see that it's Chase. Now, as we start getting down in here, do you see that whole net block section, that 159.53 network block, are all F5 big IPs. Look at there. So we can look, and F5 big IP is a load balancer. So you can go, now the next thing that we got to figure out is, does that F5 big IP have an ASM? So the ASM is what's called the Application Security Manager. So the Application Security Manager is basically a web application firewall. But we also figured out from the RobTechs that they're using Prolexic. Right? So not only do they have F5 big IPs, they're also using Prolexic, right? So Prolexic just got purchased by Akamai. So not only do you have load balancing, but you also have a web application firewall that you need to deal with as an attacker. So it's looking to me like breaking into Chase will be kind of hard. Probably not impossible though, but yeah, looks like it's going to be kind of hard. So I actually met a lot of the guys who worked at Prolexic. You know, I met a bunch of those guys down in Florida. We were down for a conference called Hack Miami. A bunch of really cool people. A lot of smart guys down there, and girls. And girls. But really good group of people. Just a bunch of nice people. So definitely really interesting. So Wikipedia, RobTechs, Netcraft, and believe it or not, Firefox. So I'm about to show that, but let me do one more. So the next one is called Hoovers.com. So here's Hoovers. Hoovers is a paid service, full disclosure, paid service. But if you're doing a lot of penetration testing, these are the types of services that you'd want to pay for. So I'm just going to search for Chase. Come on, buddy. A little slow there, huh? There we go. Okay, so you see it's got JP Morgan Chase, Chase Corporation. You can see the headquarters, you can see the revenue, right? And you can see all these details of these reports. So I'm just going to look at a real quick report right here, try to give you an idea. And you can see how it's like, okay, here's the company information, number 21, Fortune 100, Dow Industrials, right? Here's your three primary competitors, Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Here's your company profile stuff. Now look at all these reports on the side, right? Company report, finance and insurance industry report, mortgage banking industry, right? Financial planners and investments report, security brokerage investments report, mutual fund industry report. All of these reports will be related to your target customer. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to show, like, okay, for you, Mr. Customer, here's your verticals, here's your competitors, here's where you are in the marketplace, and this is why, you know, your targets may be coming after you, your competitors may be coming after you. You know, maybe they're trying to gain market advantage or something like that. Okay, the next one. The next one is tools. Now, I'm not going to go through that many tools, but I'm going to go through the one that I think is most important, and that's Firefox. Firefox has an add-on that's free, and it's called Passive Recon. So Passive Recon, if I open up Firefox, so here's Firefox. I'm going to go to Chase. Now that I'm on the Chase website, let's just go to Google. We'll say Passive Recon. So Passive Recon, you're going to see that it's a Firefox add-on, right? It's a free Firefox add-on. So just click Add to Firefox. Now, once you do that, you're going to be able to right-click on websites. See, I just did a right-click, and I say Passive Recon. Now, as soon as I do that, look at the options that I have. I can enumerate via DNS, I can enumerate email, I can do a bunch of Google stuff. I'm going to get to that in a minute. So let's start with the DNS enumeration. So I'll go Passive Recon, DNS, and I'll yank the data from into DNS. While that's running, let me go here, Passive Recon, DNS, and I'll yank the data from RobTex. Okay, now if we look at that into DNS data, can you see how it's all the same information that we got from that RobTex query? Look at there. You can see that Passive Recon even pulls the RobTex data for us. So let's say I go and I start grabbing some email-based data. So here's our MX records. So you can see here's that same data that I got from RobTex. But are you starting to see that now? You're like, man, if I use this Passive Recon, I can do a lot of that same stuff that I was just doing before, right? It pulls up all the same websites. Let's say I jump into the enumeration. There's that Netcraft site report. It pulls open that same site report I just showed you. Pretty good, huh? Now, here's where it really starts to shine. Look at all these different Google searches. Now, with the Google searches, remember how I said I use a lot of Google? You might say, okay, well, let me go to Google, and what I want to look for is site.com, chase, site chase.com, file type, PDF, right? In other words, go to any chase.com website and give me all of the PDF files, right? Give me all of the PowerPoint files, right? Give me all of the doc files, right? Now, some people try to grab something called metadata. Now, what they're trying to do when they do this is they want to download these various document files, and then via the metadata, in other words, the properties inside of the document may have the file owner who created it, the software version that he used to create it, and the location where it was stored while it was being created. So what does that mean you get? You could be getting things like the document was created by Joe McCrae. It was created in Office 2000, you know, uh, 10, and uh, it was saved on this network share. And here's the address of this network share. Okay, so this is what I'm getting at, right? So you may want to go off and grab all these different file types. There's just so many. And this is, again, this is why I don't really want to get into this, because this is just taking me way too long. But you can go through going after all these different types of file types, and then for every different type of file, go out and grab it, suck it down, and then run it through something like Foca, which is one of the tools that you see is on my list here. Now, I'm not going to really walk you through Foca because that would just take way longer than what I planned for this video, but suffice to say, you can say go out, download all of these files, and then for every file, scrape the metadata and tell me what pieces of software was used to create these files. Once I know that, I may want to craft a spear phishing campaign where I'm going to send targeted emails, and the targeted emails are going to have exploits for the pieces of software that I know that they use. Let's say the particular version of Adobe Acrobat Reader, or the particular version of the Microsoft Office suite, so that you can craft exploits for the target. Okay, next thing is, what does a passive recon sample report actually look like? Well, it's also called an OSINT report. So I'm going to grab an OSINT report here. So here's an OSINT report. We yank this sucker down. Looks like it's a pretty big report, so it's going to take a few seconds to download. Then once we have this open, let's step through what an OSINT report looks like. So open this up. Okay, so this is an OSINT report against a real customer of mine. So Anopos was a real customer of mine, and you're going to see what this OSINT report actually looks like. So you see how we start off with the executive summary. And we say, okay, we're just trying to find as much publicly available information. Now you see this report's 35 pages. So we start with the company information, the reputation, where we say, okay, well, this is what we know about you. This is your place in the industry amongst your competitors, right? Here's your company mission, company purpose. Now, do you notice for each thing we say where we got that information? So the customer can see where we're getting that information, how we're learning about them. Here you see that we were able to actually get an org chart. So we have an org chart, we have the layout of the executive management of the company. You see that we have all of their locations broken down. So you can see their Mexico-based locations, right? Their locations in Canada, right? Their manufacturing locations in, what's that, Chicago, let's see, Nashville, right? Here you can see that we yanked down their financial overview, right? So here's how much money that they've made, right? They're losing money, right? It's going down over the years. These are all things that we're able to figure out. Net sales, gross profit margin information, right? Risk related to business. So what risks do they have? What things are going on, right? Availability of the materials that they're trying to process so that they can sell, environmental concerns that they're having to deal with, right? So we map out all of those things, right? Different trends and their future outlook based on the information that we're able to learn about them, right? Capital expenditure, what they're spending their money on, what's good about it, what's bad about it, right? Their corporate information, so you see that we're able to figure out their tax ID information number, right? All their corporation numbers. Here's some really interesting things, like we're able to data mine job postings. So we can figure out what job postings that they have, so we can figure out what types of positions they have available and how we can use that to data mine more information. Maybe you could go on job interviews so that you can ask more questions. You can call about jobs, right? And say, I'd like to speak to the hiring manager so that you can ask for more information. Maybe you're able to actually plant a person in the company. If you look at some of these jobs, they have production engineer, they have maintenance supervisor. These are people who would have physical access to critical resources. Here's the infrastructure footprinting. So you see, here's all that same stuff that I taught you, right? Mapping out the network infrastructure, right? Figuring out where the different servers are located, email servers, web servers, IP addresses, technologies that those platforms are using. You're seeing how all that stuff I've been teaching you before, all that passive recon stuff is what's now going in this document. All that Wikipedia stuff is what's now going in this document. You're starting to see all those bits of information are the things that I put in here, right? Here's that autonomous system network information. Here's the networks that you're a part of. So here you can see all the server identification when we're able to identify all the subsidiary servers. Email addresses that we were able to scrape from various marketing websites. Remember that Hoover stuff? You can collect email addresses from there. Hoover's, Spoke.com, tons of marketing companies like Lead 411. Those are all places that you can use to data mine email addresses of key employees. Here's Maltego. Again, I don't have enough time to show Maltego and the breakout of all the data mining that you can do with Maltego. To cover Maltego, I need a lot of time. Couldn't do that in just a quick video, but you get the idea. It's a data mining platform that you can use to map out relationships between pieces of data online. Here's some other stuff that we're able to find. And this is an example of what I was talking about, right? Where you can learn from that metadata. You see how they use a K drive, right? So it's all mapped to a network drive, and you can see the folder structure in that network drive. This is what I was talking about, metadata. Excuse me. The next thing, I'm going to skip down through some of this stuff here, personnel profiling. So now for every person who's a key member in the organization, we want to data mine them even further. Let's look up their LinkedIn profiles, their Facebook profiles. Let's see if we can go to their alumni organization for the college that they went to. Let's see if we can learn about their family members. Let's see if we can learn anything about these people that would help us target them. So can you see here? Here's all the key management. So here's all the key management at Anophos. So we data mine through all that key management, and then we map their social media profiles so we can figure out who's got new jobs there, who's been there the longest, what colleges did they go to. I really love to use what colleges that they go to. So let's say, for example, this person went to Stanford. So what you can say is you can craft a social media profile and then you can email this person. You can say, hey, Victoria. Hey, Victoria, I see that you went to Stanford. I'm a few years behind you, and I'm not asking for any favors. Excuse me. But I would really appreciate it if you would forward my resume on to so-and-so, the head of blah, blah, blah department. Again, I'm not asking for any favors. I would just really appreciate it if you could forward my resume on to this correct person. So let's say there was an email address that you could not get. through your data mining, but you could figure out that you can reach this person and this person works in that department or should know this person that you're trying to target. You can come up with some social story, right? Build social media profiles and build this persona and now start working emails to get your malware to that targeted person. Okay. So again, this is an example of an OSINT report, right? Spoke is one of the places where we go to get email addresses, phone numbers, and all that of key individuals and organizations. So this is the idea of an OSINT report, passive reconnaissance report. So there's a ton of data. There's a ton of data that you can gain from these types of things. All right, so let's stop there. Our next segment will be covering quick hits. Okay, guys, let's start our next segment. Our next segment is going to be called quick hits. Now, we just got finished doing all this passive reconnaissance. I think the next important thing is to try to find quick hits before we start external scanning. You want to, before you start doing a lot of vulnerability scanning, sometimes there's just stuff that's really fast. So you're performing your penetration test and you already know who the target customer is. You've already learned a lot of Google stuff, and what I mean by a quick hit is a very fast vulnerability. Fast vulnerabilities for me are usually found through Google. So let's say, for example, if I want to look for in URL the Etsy password file. So this is for somebody who's got a call to their Etsy password file. So this is a great way to say, okay, I'm looking for Etsy password to be in the address bar. In the text of the website, I'm looking for the word root. So this is a great way to find somebody who's already got this vulnerability. See that? So that's their password file. Now, again, we're not really trying to go down the road of what Google hacking is, but suffice to say, if you can find people who've got these vulnerabilities in their environment, what you can say is, all right, well, what I want to do is I don't want to just do the stuff blindly. What I'm looking for is, can I say site : chase.com? Let's stick with chase.com, the target that we've been doing. So what you can say is, for each of these Google vulnerabilities I'm looking for, look for them only in chase.com. So now you can use that Google hacking database, right? And it's going to be on exploitDB right here. And each thing that you look for, you're going to always add the word site : chase.com. So let's say, for example, I'm looking for sensitive directories. What I would do is I would say, I don't want sensitive directory stuff. Let me find stuff that would give me a foothold. So I search for stuff that's going to give me a foothold. Let's see. Probably not going to. There we go. All right. So here's, let's see, some, looks like here's some shells. Okay, so what this is looking for is this is looking for a web shell. So we'll take a web shell. Come on, Google, hurry up. There we go. All right, so what's happening here is you're looking for, here's what to search for. So these are websites that look like they have a web shell on them. Let's see if we can jump on it. Nope. On it. No, this Google safe browsing. All right, so there's a web shell. So what a web shell is what allows you to manage somebody's website. It's a web interface that executes system commands. So that's a great way. Some hacker has already compromised this website. I don't know who this guy is, but john.dollar-gang.com. So John.dollar, sucks to be you because you've been hacked. So somebody broke into that website And you can see that there's tons of people who have these web shells on their servers. We'll jump off that one. So the whole thing of finding these is this would be a great way. So now we're just going to throw in site:/chase.com, and it looks like they don't have that, but let's see if they have C99 C99 shell.php. Do they have that? No. Let's try R57 shell. Oops. Okay, no R57 shells. So that's great. Okay, probably would be bad if they did have that. But what I'm getting at is you as an attacker should look for quick hit stuff. You should look for things like PCF files. Right, so give an example. Let's go file type PCF. Right, so a PCF file is a VPN configuration file. Okay. Looks like Google doesn't want us doing that. So let's just show a PCF file real quick. So file type PCF. Okay, so this is somebody's VPN configuration file, and that's what a PCF file is, right? So what it's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to connect to that company's VPN. So you're always going to be looking for things like PCF files, ICA files for Citrix. You're always going to be looking for anything that can give me extremely fast access to a website, like an SQL injection, anything that you can quickly Google. So again, the whole thought process behind these is to look for things that you can very, very quickly use to give you access. Now, I need to be really careful here because I'm really kind of teetering on, what's legal, but you got to understand that you as an attacker, as a pen tester rather, need to replicate the hacker threat. This is stuff that hackers do. So you have to be able to not just vulnerability scan, which is what the bulk of us pen testers do. And this is why so many pen testers miss so much stuff. And they turn around and a hacker still finds it and breaks in. It's the combination of the automated vulnerability scanning, the quick hit stuff, and the OSINT data mining stuff. It's the combination of these things that's going to allow you to gain access to a network. Now, everything I just showed you with the quick hits, don't sleep on subdomains and who they acquired. You remember when we looked up Chase, in Wikipedia. Well, what's to say that you don't do all the same stuff? There's their acquisition targets. We did a JP Chase, that's who. There we go. Okay, now what's to say you don't do everything I just showed you on all of their subsidiaries? So all that passive recon stuff that I showed you on Chase, then you turn around and do all that passive recon stuff on all of their subsidiaries. Then now that you've got this quick hit stuff, you go through all this. Maybe you don't find anything on Chase. Probably won't, right? Chase, their major domain, probably won't find anything like that. But what about all these subsidiaries that they own? You could do it there. And you would probably find something that you could break into very quickly. And then with that would give you your first foothold in the environment. Now, does that mean I'm not going to do my entire next segment, vulnerability scanning? No, of course not. Yes, we still need to do the vulnerability scanning. Now, all the external vulnerability scanning, that's your InMap, your Nessus, your Acunetics, your NetSparker, all that stuff we're about to do. We're going to do all that, but this is the little thing that I find newbie pen testers really want to learn. They want to know, how do I find the stuff that I find? Like, how is it that they're doing a pen test and I find stuff that they don't find? And this is one of my little secrets, being able to quickly find footholds in an environment to get you your first beachhead, if you will, into the environment. And then from there, you can start to pivot and move around. Sometimes breaking into a network, it's just so difficult. And the reason it's so difficult is because all the vulnerability scanning stuff, well, not all, but a pretty healthy chunk of the vulnerability scanning stuff I'm about to show you in our next section is being done by the customer. So the target customer has an information assurance program. So they're already vulnerability scanning. They're probably running the same tools as you do. They have Kali, they download it, and they run all the same tools you do. So you're going to find that there's a lot of times that you're doing your penetration test and you really don't find anything that they don't know about. Now that's the problem, because they probably hired you to find some stuff that they don't know about. So you're going to need to figure out, how do I come up with these little tricks? How do I come up with these little things that they're probably not doing? So you're going to need to learn to shy away from all of these different tools and really kind of get your hands dirty and do some manual stuff. This manual stuff with this quick hits, this is the stuff that's really gonna wet your whistle, right? This is the stuff that's really gonna show the customer that you got some tricks that they just don't have. And it's because no one has the time to do these many different searches against their domain. So this is what's really going to benefit you, in that you as a pen tester, you already know to run all your automated scanning stuff. So while all your automated scanning stuff is running, this is what you actually should be doing. You should be spending your time going through each of these that you think are going to be relevant to the target customer. And if you go, okay, this to my target customer is a relevant vulnerability that may be in his environment, right? So those are the ones that you go after with this Google Dork stuff. And you try to see if you can find something that they didn't know about, something that's like, wow, something that kind of, shock and awe, right? You gotta on every pen test come up with one or two really good nuggets, and you gotta make that a staple of the pen test, because the hard part about pen testing, believe it or not, is not doing the work, it's coming back to do it again. So you're gonna have to be able to find these nuggets that they didn't find, that they didn't know about, that makes them go, wow, his consulting firm, they're pretty good. You're going to need to do that so that you can come back. So I really hope that they gave you, and I know I'm sorry that it's a short video, but it's kind of a short subject, but I really hope that it gives you like a little tidbit, a little nugget that you can kind of put in your pocket to kind of say, wow, this will really make me a much better pen tester. Okay, well, welcome back. Let's get started with our next segment. Our next segment is external scanning. So what's it like when you're on the outside of a network trying to scan and identify vulnerabilities? So the simple truth about this is there really is the old way and the new way. And the new way is kind of my personal thing. What I do when I'm on penetration tests, I find that I still do a lot of external penetration tests. And for me, I do a lot of web app stuff. So it's kind of transitioned over the last few years. So let me kind of show you what I mean. So I'll show you the old way, and I'll show you what I call the new way, which is headache detection. So back in the old days, when I first started hacking, what we used was this methodology, was basically ping sweep, port scan, banner grab, vulnerability research, and then actual exploit. So what you would do is you would use Nmap or a similar tool to ping as many hosts in a particular target subnet as possible, trying to figure out which hosts were alive and reachable. Then you port scan those hosts. So you port scan those hosts to figure out what ports were open. Once you knew what ports were open, you'd say, okay, these are the hosts that I know are alive. Then you go, okay, well, these are the hosts that I know that are running specific services. Then what you would do is you'd say, okay, I've identified like X many FTP servers, X many DNS servers, X many mail servers, X many whatever type of other types of servers out there. Then you would say, okay, well, now let me look specifically at one of these servers and let's get the version of this particular server. We call that a banner grab. And there was a couple of different ways that you could do it. So you would do your banner grab and then you'd say, okay, well, this piece of software is running this version on this port. So it's not just a FTP server, it's running, you know, ServU FTP 4.2, right? It's not just an FTP server, you know. On one machine, it might be running Pro FTP, another one might be running WS FTP, and another one might be running ServU FTP, and the one that's running ServU FTP is the one that I want to go after because ServU FTP, you know, is riddled with vulnerabilities. The other ones don't have anywhere near as many, so I'd go after that particular version. You jump to websites like Security Focus, exploitdb.com, PacketStorm. These are websites where you go to look for exploits, right? And then you download the appropriate exploit and launch it against your target. So before I jump into the way that I do it now, let me kind of walk you through that. So let's say I've got a Windows XP host. Okay, 153.130. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick ping sweep. So let's sudo nmap s capital P 192.168.153. Right? So I'll do this quick ping sweep. Let's see what's up in the network. Okay, there's 130. That's definitely the guy I'm going to mess with. Okay, let me change that ping sweep to a port scan against 130. 130 is my XP box. So I can see that it's running a web server. I can see that it's running the Windows ports. Right, so it's definitely a Windows web server. Now what I want to do is I want to try and get a quick version query, banner grab. So I'll do the exact same scan again, but this time, rather than just knowing what ports are open, I want to specifically know the versions of those ports that are open. So we can see that in this case, this Windows machine is running Apache, and it's running a vulnerable version of Apache. So what we do is we say, okay, you know what? Let me go out to exploitdb.com/search, and let's look for Apache. Okay. Definitely that version has an exploit that's in Metasploit. Let's see, 1.2.20. Okay, do you notice this is really important, guys? You need to look at the version numbers. So although this is Win32 and this one's Win32, are you guys seeing that they're not the correct versions? This one is 1.2.19. This one is 2.0.2. This one is 1.2.20. That's what I'm running. But when you actually go and take a look at it, you'll see that this thing is for Linux and Unix-based systems. See? SUSE Linux, Debian, right? SUSE, Debian, FreeBSD, right? So although vulnerable, right, you get down here, that's Linux shellcode. He's telling you right in the source code. That shellcode is made for Linux, right? This is BSD shellcode. So if you take this exploit and you try to run this joker, no joy, right? So that's not going to work, right? Cool, definitely cool, but not good. Okay, well, let's see. If we look at the 1.2.19 one, okay, written in my favorite language, Python. Okay, the EB0359EB, that's Metasploit shellcode if I've ever seen it before. That's pretty common. Okay, here's the jump ESP, length of the shellcode. Looks like it's got some NOPs. Okay, looks pretty simple to me. Okay, and then it looks like it opens up port 8888. Tries to telnet into it after that. Problem is, suckers for the wrong freaking version. So either we jump back into this, throw it in a debugger, try to see if we can modify this exploit. Looks to me like the only one that we would have is probably the Metasploit exploit. Let me just check this jump ESP and see if this is the same. Come on, open up. Open up. There we go. Okay, 1.2.20. Looks really close. Looks really close. Ooh, jump ESP isn't even close. Okay. Yeah, it's a completely different address. 32, that's what it's looking for. Okay. Yeah, oh wow, okay. Yeah, space is definitely different on different versions. So yeah, this is not one that we would want to try and run a different version of the exploit for. Okay. Well, so you would definitely use this Metasploit one because that looks like that's pretty much the only real target. You probably could modify this if you wanted to just run it in Python, but you know, if you were really on a pen test, why would you do that, right? And you could do the same thing on securityfocus.com/BID. So I would jump down here, and for my vendor, I would look for Apache. Now this is kind of a tricky one because there's so many different versions of Apache, like Apache Foundation and all this kind of stuff. So hopefully we can do this quickly. So there's apps. Where's Apache? I really wish I could work on that reading thing. Okay. Apache Software Group. Let's just try Apache. So I'll try Apache. Let's see, Ant Struts HTTP server. I really should have worked this demo out before I tried to do it on video, huh? Okay, so it's definitely not that. Let's see. Let's try. Let's try it this way. Let's pull a Getter card. URL securityfocus.com/BID. Apache. Yeah. JK. There we go. Nothing like Google. Okay. JK 1.2.20. Okay. All right. And that was just because, okay, it looks like it was under Apache Tomcat. Ah, I see, said the blind man. So that's where I should have looked. So we jump down here. Oh, this is a different vulnerability. JK CVE 2014. So that's a good thing for us to know. Let's go look at that in exploit.db. That Metasploit module is different. Okay, well, I guess this actually is a pretty good thing for you to learn because in the real world, this is actually what you do when you're actually doing pen test looking up exploits. Well, that's a newer one. Okay, so let's see what the CVE is here. The CVE here, here's the correct BID number. Yeah, so that was a completely different exploit. So I'll just swap this right there. Bam, there's the correct exploit. All right, so here's the following course developed commercial working exploit. Okay. Uno Hope is the guy who wrote some exploit code. Okay. Here's the Metasploit one. Here's one that's written in Perl. Let's take a look at that. Okay, that's not available. Awesome. Let's look at the one in C. Ugh. Woo! Okay. All right, so let's see, Unix standard. Okay, you have to compile this on Linux or Mac OS X. Okay, let's see. Apache. Oh, look. Okay, the target, once it actually exploits, has to be Linux. Look at that. Uname, ID, Echo, Hehe. It's Gobbles style. For those of you who are old like me, Gobbles was an old hacker group who did a bunch of like BSD exploits. Shut Up Theo was probably his most famous BSD, open BSD exploit. That is definitely Linux shellcode, so we definitely can't run that sucker against the Windows target. Let's see this unhope one. Oh, well, this is the one we just looked at. 1.2.19. Okay, so you're pretty much stuck with this Metasploit one. If you were going to do this, yeah. Alpha upper, yeah. Pretty much what you're stuck with. So either you're good enough to write it yourself, maybe a later course. Vivek definitely asked me to do some exploit research stuff, so maybe I'll do that for you guys in a later course. And yeah, so this is definitely the old way, right? Ping sweep, port scan, banner grab, take the version of the server, look it up, find the appropriate exploit, and launch it. That's the old way of doing it. Well, times have changed, and times have changed a lot. So here's a simple problem. This stuff doesn't work anymore. Reality check today is when you try to do that ping sweep stuff, your ping sweep stuff is often going to be blocked. That's just the truth. So a lot of this in-map scan stuff that I tried to show you right here, doing this against the subnet today, definitely, I don't want to say it never works, but it just doesn't work as often. So we've got to try and deal with that a little bit better, right? How do you do that, right? So let's go one by one, right? So let's see, how long have I been doing this video? Anybody seen a running timer? Definitely should get a running timer for this thing, huh? Nah, I guess I'm at 10 minutes. All right, let me finish this up and then I'll make another video. Okay, so you definitely want to do this a little differently, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I need to do a ping sweep, and I need to do a ping sweep against a set of public IPs that I know is probably doing like some network filtering of some sort. Do you guys see how I'm going to run something called IP crawl? So IP crawl is a really old tool, really, really old. It's an old C program. So just IP crawl.c, really old program. That's it. So it just crawls through a bunch of DNS names. Here's a really old code. Looks like he's been making some updates to it. But yeah, just a really old C program, right? And let's just take a look at it. So you see that I run it, and right now I'm running it against Oracle. Can you see how it's identifying all these hosts? For every IP address, he looks up that IP address and tries to figure out what its host name is. This is really, really handy. The reason is because it's almost impossible to block DNS, right? You've got to allow people to resolve various host names that you have. So for me, doing this rather than a ping sweep, I find this works a lot better. So for me, when I'm doing that first step, the ping sweep stuff, this is a lot better. Okay, now this is going to run for a while, so I'm going to kill it. But suffice to say, you would use this to look up the host names, right? So here's name servers, right? Here RTR, these are probably routers, right? RTR, that's another router, right? Internet gateway, that's what that kind of stuff is. And there's so much stuff out there. This subnet for Oracle is like really heavily populated. So we're not going to spend too much time on that because I don't want to go to jail, but you get the idea, right? So it's a way that you can figure out what they're doing. Now you can also do the same thing using the nmap command, nmap lowercase s capital L, lowercase s capital L. Nmap calls this a list scan. So what's really nice about this list scan capability is you can rip through this, and it does the exact same thing that ipcrawl does. So maybe you don't want to go out and download ipcrawl, compile it. You can do the exact same thing. So look, here's all these VPNs. That's probably BlackBerry Enterprise server. They've got some net cache boxes out there. Ooh, HSRP, hot standby routing protocol. These are probably VLANs, right? Right, so you can see all kinds of stuff that's out here. It looks like they've got themselves some Spark boxes, some Sun stuff. Looks like these are some firewalls. It's just massive network, right? All kinds of stuff that's out there. So what I really like is when you can scan using DNS, you can identify those hosts. It accomplishes the same thing as a ping sweep. Now, again, a lot of people, they're still teaching this old methodology, this old ping sweep port scan banner grab methodology, because I just don't think they're doing a lot of pen tests these days. That's probably the truth, right? And then I think the second part is the networks have really changed. There's just not the volume of externally available servers that aren't web servers anymore. Today, if it's not a web server, it's usually behind the firewall and you have to get to it via VPN or Citrix or something like that. So pretty much the only thing outside publicly available today is web servers. So you're going to need to up your game and really start learning to look for other defensive mechanisms, right? So you're going to need to deal with firewalls. I just showed you a technique to deal with that. You're also going to need to change the way you port scan, right? So I'm not going to go through all of these, but suffice to say, what you're looking at is here's some different tricks you can do for timing options in Nmap. So you can say, I want to use different timing. I want to scan for less ports. I can change the scan delay for the amount of time between ports. That's what the second option is. I can say like Nmap max rate, right, for how long I want to modify timing there. You can do fragments, like if you see I've got this nmap-f where you set the fragment size to be different. You can change the MTU, maximum transfer unit, for changing the size of the packets. All these are types of things that you can do to throw off defensive mechanisms, right? Now, the simple God's honest truth, I just don't use a lot of this anymore. Years ago, you really spent a lot of time trying to be stealthy. Today's penetration test, it's very rare that I have a stealth component in the penetration testing today. So it's not that I don't do it ever, you just don't do anywhere near the volume of it that you used to. I really just fire up Nessus and let it go after the subnet externally and then immediately move on to web app stuff, figuring that Nessus picks it up pretty well these days. But again, knowing how to do this stuff really kind of helps you understand what Nessus is doing, because that ping sweep port scan banner grab methodology that I explained to you is what Nessus and Qualys and Nexpose and all those other vulnerability scanners are doing. I mean, they license Nmap, for goodness sake. So really, when you buy a vulnerability scanner, that ping sweep port scan banner grab stuff I taught you, that's what the scanner is doing. So you just bought a really expensive version of Nmap. I mean, you bought a GUI to Nmap. That's what you bought when you bought a vulnerability scanner. And then that looking it up in the database of exploit.db, that's the second part of the vulnerability scanner. So I don't want you to think like, oh, one scanner is better than the other. They're all pretty much the same. So our next step, let's move on to headache detection, and that'll be our next video. So hopefully this gave you some insight as to what I do when I'm on the outside of the network looking for stuff that's externally vulnerable. On the headache detection stuff, you've got to look for modern defensive mechanisms, not just external firewalls, but load balancers, IPSs, and web application firewalls. So I'll see you in our next video when we cover that stuff. Okay, let's get started. It's time to jump into headache detection. I'd say the biggest part with headache detection is if you're testing a modern network, you're going to run into things that I call headaches. Things that are just frustrating, right? Load balancers, XML gateways, reverse proxies, content delivery networks, web application firewalls. I mean, God, there's always something out there that's messing with you. So the whole thought process behind this was I want to kind of share with you what are the things that I do. So for me, Netcraft is just a godsend. So we'll go to toolbar.netcraft.com/site_report. And I'll just do chase. So I'll do chase.com. And I really, really like this because it finds so much for me. It's such a fast way to figure out if a target has a load balancer. See, look at there. F5 big IP. So we can get out there and we can go look up an F5 big IP. F5. Come on, Joe. F5 big IP. Right? And you can see those suckers are not cheap, right? F5 big IP, these bad boys are expensive, right? So what they are, these nice little traffic manager boxes are all kinds of crazy expensive load balancers. So you can definitely see out there, these things are not cheap, but definitely pretty cool. So we can figure out that we're up against a load balancer. Now, I like using this as one way to figure out I'm up against a load balancer, but there's a couple of other ways as well. And by the way, if you guys want to follow along with the commands that I'm using, this pastebin I made for Pentester Academy. So pastebin.com/DYAP3SRG. So this is where all these commands that you see me typing are coming from. So right now you can see that I went for this. Another one that I like is live HTTP headers. I'm not going to show that right now, but I really do like that. So I really, like I said, really like this. Now, if we jump down, some other things that we can do is we can use the Linux dig command. So if I dig google.com, can you see how google.com is resolving the multiple IP addresses? This is another way that we can figure out if a target is load balanced. Now, again, for me, figuring out if a target is load balanced is a really big deal because as you start to run port scanners, if you run port scanners against the domain name, well, that domain name may resolve to multiple IP addresses. So sometimes when you're scanning, your traffic's going to be going to one host, and other times your traffic might be going to another host. And that's why it's really important to know, okay, let me figure out if there's load balancing in play, because you don't want something that can give you bad results. Now, there's a couple of other tools that I really like, and I'm going to show this. Sometimes it kind of flakes out, so I really hope that the tool runs well. So this is a tool called lbd.sh, and lbd.sh, load balancer detection.sh, and it looks like it blew up on me. That's awesome. As soon as I tell you, like, hey, I hope it runs, and it doesn't. Okay, so lbd.sh, depending on my network, you know, sometimes these hotel networks really aren't good for this, so yeah, it's not working, but you just have to trust me. So effectively what the tool does is, I'll do it with Halberd. So you run halberd.com just like lbd.sh, and it looks for load balancer detection. So What it's going to do is it's going to try several different ways to figure out if it's load balanced. So it's going to check to see if it's DNS-based load balancing, and then it's also going to check to see if it's using something called HTTP-based load balancing. With HTTP-based load balancing, you have one domain name and one IP address. So because you have one domain name and one IP address, it becomes hard to figure out that there's actually multiple hosts behind that one domain name and one IP address. Completely different than DNS-based load balancing, where with DNS-based load balancing, you can see, just like this, one domain name corresponds to multiple IP addresses. So Halbert is good because he's going to do the DNS check. You can see that here. So it resolves to these two IP addresses. But the other thing that he does is he has where he sends a myriad of requests to the target and checks the timestamps of those targets to see if there's any fluctuation in the timestamps of those targets. Let's say you make 50 connections to one domain name and IP address. And if you see a fluctuation that's not a smooth ascension of the IP address, then you can tell that you're connecting to multiple servers. So it's a great way. Another thing that Halbert does is he also checks to see if the session ID changes. Let's say you make 50 connections to one server and the session ID changes. You probably got handed off to a different server. So for me, I've found identifying load balancers to be a really important part of your security testing. And I know, me saying this, you're probably thinking, that's not that big of a deal. But if you're running vulnerability scanners against a target and your vulnerability scanner sometimes is talking to one server and other times it's talking to a different server, it's going to skew your results. And if you have skewed results, you're not going to be able to do good vulnerability identification, and you won't be able to exploit stuff when it really might be exploitable. And that's why I spend so much time on load balancer detection. I know a lot of people don't. I talk to a lot of other pen testers and I see that they don't do it, but I think it's really important. Okay, so let's move on. The next one is looking for intrusion prevention systems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run, this is a really old tool. It's called active filter detection. Now what active filter detection does is you're going to send a ton of requests to a server. Now each of these requests is not a real attack. It's the signature of an attack. So what this tool does is it takes 81 different snort and IDS signatures. It sends these, different snort and virus signatures, puts these on the wire. Now these are completely benign. It's not the real attack. It's just the signature of an attack. See, cat Etsy Mont D, message of the day. ../../px psaux, right? These are not real attacks, right? ../../ bin uname, right? -a with a pipe. These are not real attacks. What they are is part of a regular expression used to make up an attack. Now, this stuff will certainly, right, GCC, compiling a code ./a.out, this stuff, right, this stuff is gonna light up in IDS. It's gonna light up in IPS, and that's the goal. If there's an intrusion prevention system in place, when this stuff is placed on the wire, the intrusion prevention system will either give you a reset ACK packet and kill your connection, or he'll block your IP address. And the idea behind that is you've now identified a intrusion prevention system. So that was the whole thought process behind it. So the idea is you can now figure out if there is an intrusion prevention system in play, because if you're doing stuff and you see that it's killing your connections, which this tool will detect, or you see that it's blocking your IP address, which this tool will detect, you now know that you're dealing with an intrusion prevention system, something like a Proventia, right, or tipping point, something that's blocking your IPs actively. So you're going to need to really kind of deal with that. Now, the way that I deal with that is I change my IP address. I use something called global VPNs. So what I'll do is I'll have a VPN service like Ace VPN. So when my IP address gets blocked, I just change to a different IP address and launch my attacks from a different country. With global VPNs, you can bounce in and out of pretty much any country that you want. So if I'm attacking and I'm seeing that my attacks are getting blocked, I can just change IPs and keep attacking. You can also use this to enumerate the intrusion prevention system's rule set. Now again, I'm not trying to say that this is something I do a lot of, because the honest truth is I just don't. Remember how I told you in the previous segment is that very little of our testing has a stealth component today. So unless the customer explicitly asks me to do this kind of stuff, it's not something that I do a lot of. I mean, again, you may do it once or twice a year. In my case, once or twice a year is how often I'm doing it. I'm not doing it every week. I do pen test a lot, but again, I definitely would say that I do some stealthy stuff, but it's not like a major focus of my external testing. But you do need to be able to figure out, are you up against an intrusion prevention system? Now, usually your statement of work, what we talked about in the previous video, usually your statement of work will ask that the customer whitelist you from defensive products like this. Now, what you run into is sometimes you don't know if the customer's doing it, if a different department who's monitoring their network, like maybe a business unit hired you, but the network security team has the appliance, so they didn't whitelist you, or the ISP or hosting company has some sort of security product and they didn't whitelist you. So you run into this stuff all the time. For me, I don't use it so much as a bypass technique as much as I want to know if something's going to mess up my scan results. And that's why I would say I use it the most. Again, are there cases where I do have to bypass an IPS? Yeah, it does happen, but I wouldn't say that it happens a lot, but it happens. So when it does happen, let me show you how I do it. What I do is I create a service called SSL test. So you see that I create this service called SSL test. It opens up port 8888 on my local machine. So on my local machine, any traffic that goes into port 8888 is going to get pushed into this script. Now I only allow traffic from port 8888 from my local host. So you see that? I only allow traffic from localhost. So now if we look at this file, you'll see that any traffic that goes into port 8888 gets pushed into sslproxy.sh. And then that gets pushed into OpenSSL. So OpenSSL creates a tunnel and tunnels my traffic to the target site, in this case strategicsite.com, my website. And then this just discards errors, right? So this becomes a way to do that active filter detection test that I just showed you to figure out if there's an IDS or IPS in place. So let's say the message is the opposite, comes up, tells you, hey, there really is an IDS or IPS in play. What you want to do now is you want to run active filter detection against the local host. Now, when you run it against localhost, look here, it's going to send all that traffic to port 8888, right? Which is what we learned up here. It sends all the traffic to port 8888. Any traffic that goes into port 8888 gets pushed into your proxy script. Your proxy script tunnels and encapsulates that traffic in OpenSSL and then forwards it on to your real target on the encrypted port. This is important because it's going to allow you to bypass intrusion prevention systems. Most people, when they deploy an external intrusion prevention system, don't take the certificates off of their individual web servers and put them on an SSL accelerator in front of the IPS, which is what would be required so that you could decrypt the traffic in front of the IPS so that the traffic would pass by the IPS as clear text. So in a lot of cases, having an intrusion prevention system benefits me as an attacker because it forces the defender to not be able to see encrypted traffic. So then I can just use that encrypted traffic to connect to the machine and do my exploits. So here you're running that traffic, it's going through that tunnel. You're going to notice it's a little bit slower, but it's going through that tunnel. And for me, this is a really nice trick. Some people use a tool called S-Tunnel to do the exact same thing. They don't create a service like I do, but you know, definitely handy. Definitely handy. Okay, let's try the next one. The next one is identifying web application firewalls. Web application firewalls are something that you're definitely going to run into a lot of. So I'm going to use a tool called WAF-Woof. I'm pretty proud to say that I was one of the guys who helped out with WAF-Woof. My good buddy Sandro is the developer of the tool. So you can see right here how we're running this, and we ran it against Oracle.com, and it looks like Oracle is using a combination of an F5 Big IP and Akamai, right, who actually provides web application firewall services. Let's say I run this against Chase.com. Okay, looks like Chase.com is using an Imperva web application firewall. Nice. Okay, now what you're going to see is with WAF-Woof, what we do is we send a series of tests, right? We send a valid request, then we send an invalid request, and then we send a series of attack requests. The reason is, you know, when you send an attack request, what you should get is a 404. Like if you do a cross-site scripting or SQL injection that's not a valid attack, what you should get is a 404. So we fingerprint what a valid 200 OK response code is, a valid 404 to an invalid page, a non-existent page. Then after that, all of the attacks, we fingerprint those. We fingerprint the HTTP responses. So now let's say you want to go with, you know, mod security. Look here. If you send an attack, mod security responds with a method 501. Webnight responds with a 999. If it's Imperva, right? Imperva has, let's see what it does. Oh, response.version equals 10, right? So you'll see inside of the HTTP header a 10. Let's look for, here's the signatures that I helped with, right? So you can see this is the signatures I contributed, right? So .NET Defender, right? So you'll see this x.defender denied. You'll see that inside of the HTTP request. Other ones that are really pretty wild, Barracuda, right? Denial, Citrix NetScaler. There's just so many of these that myself and the other guys got out and fingerprinted to figure it out. So what you're going to notice with web application firewalls is a web application firewall will give you a protocol-aware response. So because you got a protocol-aware response, you got something that says like you've got a 403 response code, but inside of that 403 response code, you have this string inside of it, right? You got like all this stuff. You got a valid HTTP response, but inside of it, you're going to see lock token, transfer, encoding, translate. You're going to see that stuff inside of the HTTP request, right? You're going to see, like for a NetScaler, you're going to see this inside of the HTTP request. You find all these little things inside of the request, and you know, we really kind of took the approach of looking very much almost like Nmap's fingerprinting to try to say what's unique about the response of this device when you send it a malicious string. And you'd be surprised that bypassing web application firewalls really isn't that difficult, specifically because most web application firewalls don't block your attacks. So you'll be running the attack. You'll see that it's um, being blocked by a web application firewall. The attack is being blocked, but your IP is not. So you can actually brute force most web application firewall rules, just by continually figuring out, okay, it allows this, it doesn't allow this, it does allow this, it doesn't allow this. You can use that brute force and map the web application firewall's rule set so that you can make a list of what is authorized by the firewall and what is not. So I'm going to stop right there. There's one more, and that's Nmap's NSE. So Nmap has a Nmap scripting engine NSE file that has a WAF detect mode as well. And when you see that, you'll see that it is really not that sophisticated. So let's say we want to look at the source code of that. Let's see, CD. Where is that sucker? I think it's in user local bin Nmap. No. User local sbin Nmap. No. User local. So find. See, where is the sucker at? User local sbin. Okay, user share Nmap scripts. That's where it's at. Okay, so we'll CD into user share Nmap scripts. That's where they're at. Now let's look at what's the sucker called? HTTP WAF. Okay, so now when we get in here and we look at the source code of this thing, you're going to be blown away. So this is it, right? Require HTTP, require short port, require URL, right? Port rules, short port, .http, and now look here, local attack vectors, question mark payload equals, here's all the .. slashes, etc password. Here's the union all select. Here's the cross-site scripting, etc shadow, HTTP Google, there's a remote file, right? Look at that cat etc password. Here's what looks like a cross-site scripting. Now realize none of these attacks are valid. None of these attacks are valid. Everything is question mark, misspelled payload equals, and these attack strings. So basically like 7 attack strings, right? If you give me anything other than a 404, I mean, that's really what it does. If you give me anything other than a 404, he goes, hey, you triggered something, like that's it. So I wouldn't call it the most sophisticated script out there, right? It certainly doesn't fingerprint what the defensive mechanism is. But, to have this, let's see who wrote this. I don't know the guy personally. I thought I saw his name and email in here. What's his name? There, here you go, Paulino Calderon. So, I don't know Paulino Calderon personally, but although the script is not that sophisticated, in terms of what else is out there on the market, WAF-Woof, we haven't updated that script in a couple of years, quite frankly, and a lot of the fingerprints, because the WAF vendors have, found out about the tool, they've upgraded and changed what the servers do, what the products do. So a lot of the fingerprints aren't good in our tool anymore, so it's not like I could talk a lot of crap about Paulino. I mean, you certainly built something that was necessary. And really what most people want to know when they're doing a test is it protected by a web application firewall? So I don't want to bash it. You know, Paulino, if you're watching this, I'm not bashing your tool. Definitely think it's cool. What we ought to do is we ought to get together and write a new version that actually fingerprints all of these products. But that's neither here nor there. I hope that this helped you guys out with identifying defensive mechanisms and what I like to call headaches. So I think that's a pretty good place to stop. Let's come back and let's do some other stuff. You guys take care. All right. Hey, Pentester Academy, welcome back. Let's get started with our next segment. Our next segment is going to be on external vulnerability scanning. The key piece here with vulnerability scanning is trying to move beyond all the initial stuff that you did. If you think about what we did in our last couple of segments, we said we need to find all of our external security mechanisms, you know, what I call headache detection, so that we could start actually doing the vulnerability scanning. Now, the problem is most people that are security assessors, when they do their vulnerability assessments, they just blindly scan. They don't do all the stuff that I taught you before this section rather. The reason that we did all that is because we want to make sure we know what may mess with the vulnerability scans. The super secret is it's not that I vulnerability scan any differently than anybody else. I run Nessus on OpenVAS just like everybody else who runs Nessus and OpenVAS. The thing was I did my homework early to make sure that my Nessus and OpenVAS results are going to be good. Let's get into this. Okay, so the first thing that I think that a lot of people don't know is we did all that external work that I showed you in the previous video. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, you know what, let's run not one vulnerability scanner, actually two vulnerability scanners against the target. So what I want to do is you want to ensure that you reduce the chance for false positives. You want to make sure that if two scanners say that they see the same thing, it's highly likely that it's not a false positive. The other thing that you want to ensure is that you want to make sure that you pick up stuff. Sometimes one scanner will pick up something that another scanner misses. And I found this to be really helpful. Just over the years of penetration testing, this is a big deal. Now, very few pen tests actually have a stealth requirement. And quite frankly, because you're having to do so much in so little time, you know, you typically have like 5 days. So there's not a whole lot of time to really be very stealthy. You have to really, really go after it pretty hard. So what do I do? When I'm on security assessments, what I prefer to do is I run 2 vulnerability scanners against my targets. So let's say I take the entire external subnet, I run Nessus against the external subnet, and I run OpenVAS against the external subnet. Then hopefully, I compare results and I go, okay, well, both of these scanners found all of these, start there. Then you jump over, okay, what's the stuff that one scanner found that the other one didn't, figure out what's going on. Now, you can run whatever scanner you want. If you want to run Nexpose or GFI or Qualys or Retina or whatever your favorite product is, they're all functionally the same. There aren't significant differences between the scanners. Your scanner is going to ping sweep to identify hosts that are in the environment. It's going to port scan to figure out what services are open per host. He's going to query each port on each open host, query each open port on each host, look up that banner that it gets in a vulnerability database, and then it's going to tell you this is what it thinks is vulnerable. That's really all it is. Now, if you want a list of vulnerability scanners, the links that I provided here will help you out. Another thing that I also run is I run something called Discover. So Discover is a script from a former student of mine, actually, really nice guy. His name is Lee Baird, and Lee put together a really nice script that combines the Nmap NSE scripts and the Metasploit auxiliary modules. Really pretty handy script. It does more than that, by the way, but that's what I use it for. Okay, the next thing that I do after that is I try to data mine anything that I can get that's public. You know, SVN repositories, GitHub pod repositories, you know, anything where I could try to find valuable source code that's out there. And again, this is just kind of shot in the dark. Hope I catch it. Hope I find it, right? So I've got a couple of good links in there if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Definitely all kinds of tools that are out there. If you do find a you know, SVN out there that's not well protected, if you find somebody's GitHub repository that's not protected, you can really yank down all their code. And quite frankly, that's how some really high-profile hacks have happened recently. GitHub, for example. Uber, you know, the car service for driving, had a really big hack recently because of GitHub. Okay. And it looks like I don't have my microphone on, so let's turn on my microphone. Okay. The last thing that I would say you should test is you really, really should look into Chris Gates' presentation called From Low to Pwned. So hopefully you kind of see my whole methodology. Now, because the volume was bad, I'm going to go back a couple slides and go through the whole dance real fast again, just in case you didn't hear it very well. So let me just make sure I summarize it one more time. You want a port scan with you want a vulnerability scan with two vulnerability scanners. It doesn't matter what they are. I choose Nessus and OpenVAS, but it's truthfully because of price, not because one scanner is better than the other. That's not the case. They're all fairly similar in terms of features. Okay. After that, I like to run a tool called Discover. Discover combines the Nmap NSE scripts, Nmap scripting engine, NSE, and the Metasploit auxiliary modules. So it port scans. For every port that it finds open, it runs the appropriate NSE script, and then for every port that it finds open, it runs the appropriate Metasploit auxiliary module. The other thing that I like to do is I like to data mine if I find any code repositories, source code repositories, GitHub, SVN, anything like that. I like to try and yank that stuff down if I find it. So here's a couple of tools that you can use for that. If you're interested in that, definitely we'll take a look at a couple of these like searchcode.rb and PillageSVN. And then the most important presentation, in my opinion, is a presentation from Chris Gates called From Low to Pwned. Absolutely really critical presentation, because now that you've done all of your vulnerability scanning, step 1, 2 scanners. Step 2, hit it really hard with your Nmap, NSE, and Metasploit auxiliary modules using the Discover script. Then step 3, see if you can find any source code repositories, critical data files, anything like that. A lot of that you should have picked up in your Google hacking from earlier in the assessment, but still you want to look again really thoroughly right now. The last thing is this From Low to Pwned by Chris Gates, where I just think he just does a phenomenal job of taking your vulnerability scanner results and your things that aren't highs, aren't mediums, your lows, coupling lows together to see if you can escalate them to a high vulnerability, something you can use to break into something. Extremely, extremely good presentation. Okay, so let's do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm in Nessus right now. You can see that it's Nessus. I'm going to kick off a brand new scan. Okay, and again, all these advanced scanning things, I just choose a regular old basic scan. Okay. Okay. So I'm setting up this scan, and literally that's it. I mean, you would think that it would be some really complicated stuff, but it's just not. So I kick off this scan, and it starts scanning the whole internal subnet. Now, this internal subnet is really just my VMware workstations. That's all it is. So I got a couple of virtual machines that you're going to see it scan. What I'll do is I'll try to find a scan that's not a customer. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So this is me scanning a classroom network. Okay, so can you see how I've got 24 hosts identified? Okay, and now if you look at this legend on the right side, he's telling you lows are blues. Okay, so that's all these. I'm sorry, infos are blues. Lows are green. That's these. And then here's the mediums. Okay, so that's all of this stuff. Okay, looks like I don't have any highs or criticals. Okay, now this is a really good scan to show you because on external pen tests, this is actually pretty common. When you start doing a lot of pen testing and you start scanning from the outside, you often find that usually your highs and your criticals, these are the ones that you're actually going to be able to exploit, right? You'll break in with a vulnerability that you can exploit with these. This stuff, all this stuff here, usually don't find much that you can do a lot with. So let's go look at some of those. So what I'm going to do is rather than go by host, so if you see I go by host, what you can do is you can click on a host, and then for that particular IP address, you'll see everything listed for that IP address, right? And you can see it's a lot of SSL stuff, a lot of SSL stuff, a lot of SSL stuff. Might be able to go after that SSL padding attack, okay? All this low stuff not looking all that good. Okay. Looks like it's running fully qualified domain stuff. Pipe listing disclosure. Not really looking like a whole lot of stuff I could really use. Well, so that's frustrating. Now, what you can do is I can go back to the host and I can sort by vulnerabilities. So I like to do this real quick, sort by vulnerabilities. The reason I like to sort by vulnerabilities is I can pretty quickly figure out, like, okay, 15 machines have this. In this case, 29 machines have this. 20 machines have this. 17 machines have this. So what I like to do is I like to sort by vulnerabilities first. So while I'm doing all that scanning, I like to go through this whole list and try to figure out, okay, what are going to be the things that I can really, really use, right? So how do I do that? What I like to do is I sort by vulnerabilities first. 1 second here. Looks like I lost my power. There we go. Okay. I like to sort by vulnerabilities first. You saw that I did that. The next thing that I like to do is I like to go up here and I like to create a filter. So I create a filter and I try to create filters for stuff that has exploits. So create a filter for stuff that has exploits. So I was right. See, that SSL v3 padding is probably the only thing you could really use in this case. So I'm going to click in that. SSL v3 padding Oracle downgraded legacy encryption vulnerability poodle. Okay, let's see. Remote host is affected by man in the middle. Information disclosure vulnerability due to the way that it uses SSL version 3.0. Okay, so you would get down in here and you'd look at the number of hosts that have it, what ports they have it on. Okay, now what I like to do is I like to look for BIDs. You see down here this reference information? I like to look for BID numbers. The reason that I like to look for BID numbers is securityfocus.com/BID/this number. That's where this is going to go. If you click on that and you open that up in a new tab, what you're going to notice, whoops, so I'll click on that, I'll open that up in a new tab. What's really nice is when you do this, you get all of your vulnerability data. So here's all my vulnerability data, the bug track ID, CVE vulnerability information, common vulnerabilities and exposures, that's what all this stuff is. Okay, you get what's vulnerable, all the different variants of software that's actually vulnerable. The other thing that I think is really important for this is I click exploit. For me, it's the fastest way to find exploits. So I just click here, click exploit. Now, again, the reason that a lot of people like products like Nexpose and stuff like that is because they want to be able to import that directly into Metasploit and launch the exploit. Okay, so it says attacker may use readily available tools to exploit this issue. Core Security Technologies has developed a working exploit as part of its Core Impact product. This exploit is not otherwise known to be circulating in the wild. Okay, so, well, that didn't help very much. OSVDB also sometimes has exploits, but I really like Security Focus much more than that. But what I would probably do next if I were on a pen test is I would probably go to exploit.com, exploitdb, and I would probably search for the Poodle exploit. So we'll take ourselves a little look-see. See if there's anything for Poodle. Nothing. Ooh, oh man. Really hoped I would have had better luck there. 1 second. Sorry to guys to multitask here. All right, so, well, that's frustrating. Again, here's another thing. This happens on pen tests. You do all that hunting and all that hunting only to find out that there's no publicly available exploit. Now you're like, God, dog, this is going to be hard. So that's where, remember I said that from low to pwned talk that Chris Gates does? That's where it starts to really get interesting. That's where you start to say to yourself, okay, well, can I find any of those lows that are something that I can actually exploit? So I'll go back to the vulnerabilities, and you very quickly say, all right, well, is there anything that has let's take a real quick last ditch effort. Is there anything that is in Let's clear the filters. That didn't work. Normally in this list you can say, is there something Metasploit? Okay, so not looking good there. So what would we do? We would say, man, this is really going to suck. We would individually go down through these now. So let's see. All the SSL stuff, I'm probably going to skip. Probably not necessarily exploitable. SMB server signing required. What you can probably do with these, you can probably do an SMB relay attack. The guys from SANS did a pretty good blog post. There you go. These guys did a pretty good blog post on how to do this. This would probably be what you would go for, right? And they give you the syntax and everything for how to do this. Now, again, this isn't a good example because we're talking external. It's an internal vulnerability typically, but I want you to just kind of understand the process. Let's jump over here. Let's see if we can find a vulnerability that you'd probably find externally. I'm trying to look through some of my previous scans to see if I can find something that's external. This stuff is all pen test customers, so oh, that's not good. Okay, well, let's get out here. Let's look at these. Okay, so this is some example of some external stuff. I was doing a pen test last week. So let's sort by vulnerabilities. Okay, these criticals are false positives. Okay, when we actually went and looked in them, they really weren't running Windows 2000, Server 2003. All this Cisco stuff is pretty legit, but let's see if we can find something that you probably typically find externally. How about I search for okay, there's the core impact exploit framework. Wonder why Metasploit isn't in here. That's weird. Haven't seen that before. That's great to have that happen in a video, huh? All right, well, let's just do exploit available. So go for all of these where it has exploits available, and now you notice the list like really shrinks. And then I would try to go after these. Okay, huge thing. All of these ones where you have denial of service, gotta get rid of that stuff. Don't do any DOS stuff. It's extremely rare that a customer will allow you to do any denial of service testing. It looks like here in this host, you've got a password hashing vulnerability that you can yank out. Okay, because this is real public IP stuff, guys, I'm not going to drive down into that, so I'm not going to show you that, but you get the idea. So let's go back to that Pentester Academy demo. Okay, looks like it's going to be scanning for a while, so I'm just going to stop there. I hope that was enough to kind of give you an idea of what I do. So I do the stuff with Nessus. At the same time, I would be running OpenVAS. I'm not going to do that because the interface, it's just the same thing, right? Everything I just showed you, I do the exact same thing, and I see if they match up. Let's go to something that we actually can show you. Remember I said the other thing that I run is that leadbear discover script? So let's say sudo sh/discover.sh. So, whoops. There you go. Okay, so this fires up. I'm going to choose CIDR. In my case, it's an internal scan. Okay, Pentester Academy demo, right? And then I'm going to give it my internal IP range. Again, this would be pretending that it was external. So instead of choosing 2 like I did, you choose 1 right here. The scans are the same, but it just sorts the folders differently. That's all. Okay, dot 0/24. It's my internal network. Okay, so now here's what I really like. You just follow right down the list. Do you have an exclusion list? Do I have IPs that I have to exclude? No, I don't. Do I want to do full TCP scans? No, I don't. Do I want to perform version detection? No, I don't. And do I want to insert any scan delays? I'm just going to hit enter, and now it immediately starts doing the Nmap scans. So he fires off all the appropriate Nmap scans. Now there, you can see that it's got results for those Nmap scans. You can see that it's finding ports open, it's finding services up, it's finding all kind of stuff, right? Now, as soon as it sees each of these, it starts to run the appropriate Nmap NSE scripts. Okay, so it's running the appropriate Nmap NSE scripts right now. Sorry about that, I had to respond to a text message. And now it says, hey, do you want to run the appropriate Metasploit auxiliary module? So for every corresponding port, I'm just going to say no to that. You know, the Nmap stuff is usually sufficient, but you know, you may want to run the the Metasploit auxiliary modules. So let's go cat this file. Let's take a look at it. So you see how he's like, here's your report, and he shows you the hosts that were discovered. He shows you the ports that were open. Shows you that the high value ports, here's the high value ports. And then it gives you the actual Nmap results. And then immediately after that, you can see that it's running every appropriate Nmap NSE script. Okay, really, really good data. I would look through this to see if there's anything that the scanners missed. Again, so now you've got 2 vulnerability scanners plus your discover script to see if there's anything that you missed. So here, like I was able to enumerate some shares. Okay, this is all stuff that you want to go through, and I'm telling you, you'd be surprised the amount of stuff that you find if you just do this, because it's about being thorough. Okay, all right, let's stop there. Good job today, guys. Okay, see you soon on the next video. Okay, well, I think we did pretty good with network scanning. Let's move on to web app testing. Very much the same way that we covered with network scanning, web app scanning is going to have a lot of the same traits. So we follow the same protocol. The first thing that we want to do is we want to scan the target website with 2 vulnerability scanners for the exact same reason why we did it in network. We did the same thing. Now, network vulnerabilities are going to be a little bit different than application-specific vulnerabilities. So let's give an example. A network vulnerability might be a misconfigured FTP server or a buffer overflow in a web server, as opposed to a web app vulnerability, which may be something like cross-site scripting or SQL injection. So the difference is you're going to use two different types of scanners to test for those. So when you hear people talk about Nessus, Qualys, FoundScan, GFI LandGuard, Nexpose, those types of scanners, those are going to be your network vulnerability scanners. When you hear people talk about IBM AppScan, HP Web Inspect, Acunetics, NetSparker, Synzic, what's now called AppSpider, which used to be called NTO Spider. When you hear people talk about those types of tools, that's when you're really going to see that you're testing for application security vulnerabilities. Things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, parameter manipulation, those types of vulnerabilities. And again, the reason that we test with two vulnerability scanners is to reduce the likelihood of false positives. And sometimes you find situations where one scanner picks up something that another scanner doesn't. Okay, so what do I do? When I'm on penetration test, I run two sets of scanners. The two that I use are Web Inspect and Acunetics. Okay, now here's where we kind of get into a bind. 99 times out of 100 when I'm teaching, I teach with open source tools. Now when I'm actually doing real penetration testing, I use commercial tools. Doesn't mean I don't use open source stuff at all, but I do use commercial tools. And the reason is you want better reporting. Now, this is only because now I run my own company. When I worked at previous companies, I was really at the mercy of whatever our budget would allow us to use. So I grew up having to use open source tools really because I always worked at places where we didn't have the budget for commercial tools. Well, now it's a little different now that I own my own company. So we want to start with a couple of commercial tools. Now, is that saying that the commercial tools are better than the open source tools or vice versa? No, not really. But what you're going to get with the commercial tools is much, much better reporting. Not much better vulnerability identification. I want to make sure that I make that point. Just because you're scanning with a closed source commercial vulnerability scanner versus an open source free vulnerability scanner does not mean that you'll find more vulnerabilities in one versus the other. Right? Because generally the vulnerability scanning engines are much, much the same. What differs is ease of use on the commercial side and reporting. 99 times out of 100, that's really what you're paying for. You're paying for ease of use, you're paying for reporting, and you're paying for support. That's really what you're going to gain with the commercial scanners. So, can you follow the methodology I'm giving you right now with commercial scanners? The answer is yes. Yes, of course you can. Can you follow the methodology I'm giving you right now with open source and free scanners? The answer is yes. Yes, of course you can. Just understand that if you're going to be using the free and open source stuff, you're going to have to do a little bit more labor to make good reports yourself. And I'm a Linux guy. I've been a Linux guy for 15, 16 years now. And I heard this quote a long time ago, and it really bothered me at the time. But, you know, I'm sad to say there's some truth in it. And the quote is, Linux is only free if your time is worthless. So it's not that you're going to just do so much better with a free tool. You're going to spend the same amount of money, in my opinion. Where with the commercial tool you're paying up front and you're paying in cash, whereas with the open source tool you're paying with your own sweat and labor and elbow grease and headache and heartache. Do I like open source tools? Yes, of course I do. All right, enough of that dead horse. We've beat that sucker pretty good. All right, so oops, got to make a quick little change. There's a typo. You want to say that that's a web app scanner product. Okay, so like I was saying, you've got your commercial tools, Web Inspect, Acunetics, Synzic, NTO Spider, and now AppSpider. Appium AppScan, that stuff's really good. Now you've got your open source stuff, your Burp Suite, your W3AF. Now, there's a couple of websites that you can go to. The first one is sectools.org, and you can look for web scanners that are listed there. Now, with the web scanners that are listed there, I think they've done a very good job, but SecToolMarket, the website that you're seeing in the bottom of my slides here, in my opinion, is a much better website. Let's go take a look. So when you go to sectoolmarket.com, it redirects, hold on, let me get my Zoom software here. Okay, so when you go to sectoolmarket.com, you're going to notice that it redirects here, and it redirects to this price feature comparison site for all of the web app vulnerability scanners. And I really like this because you can sort. So let's say you want to see how all the various scanners compare in terms of their ability to identify things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, local file includes, remote file includes, redirects, backups, and the different things that they audit. You can sort by saying, well, I want to see that comparison over just commercial scanners, which is what I'm doing right here. So now you'll see that whole list is now being done, and it's being done completely with commercial tools. Or you can do the whole thing with just free and open source tools, like this. So you're going to find that this is good, and each place gives you a link to where you can actually download the tool and a whole little bio about what it did good and what it did bad and all of that good stuff. It's actually a pretty good website. I met the guy who did this, who put this website together. It's a really nice guy, and I really think he's doing the right thing. He's really doing the right thing. It's a good thing for the industry. Okay. Okay. After you've run your 2 vulnerability scanners, you want to perform some manual scanning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this website right here, which is one of my vulnerable servers, and let's fire up 2 vulnerability scanners. So the first scanner that I'm going to fire up is going to be Acunetics. So I'll fire up Acunetics. Choose the web scanner, and let's start off a nice little scan. All right. So you can see now that it starts by crawling the website. So it's going to start here and it's going to crawl the website. You're going to see a breakdown of the directory structure, and then it'll give you its alerts over here on the top. So now I'm going to fire up another scanner because remember, like you said, I like to do 2 vulnerability scanners. So I'm going to do this with Web Inspect. Hope I don't kill my poor little box by doing this. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a basic scan. And let's scan the same site. There we go. No proxy. Let's just take the defaults. You're going to see it's going to do its basic little site analysis here. And what this is called the profiler. So what it's going to do with the profiler, it's going to try and grab some generic information about the target host. Is it running Windows? Is it running Linux? Is it running ASP? Is it running PHP? Are there any really quick vulnerabilities that it can identify? Are there any problems that may cause the scan to take a little bit longer than normal, which is a huge problem with vulnerability scanners. Not uncommon for some of these scans to run 8, 10, 12 hours. The scanner actually loses its session ID and gets disconnected and just goes off into the abyss and keeps scanning. That type of problem is common. All right, I'm going to flip back here and let's see how this guy's doing. Okay, looks like he's still, looks like he's transitioned. He's not crawling anymore. He's now scanning. Okay, so now that it's changed its status from crawling to scanning, the tool is no longer spidering the website. The tool is actually testing for vulnerabilities. So if we jump over here, we can see the actual vulnerabilities that are being tested for right now. So you can see that he's looking for LDAP injection, code injection, and he's looking to see if it's running MongoDB and can it look for cross-site scripting, and it's just having a grand old time. Now, a lot of people always ask me this stuff, where is this stealthy? And if you look and you see that I've only been doing this for a couple of minutes, and I'm already at 3,000 HTTP requests, the answer is what? No. No, this is not stealthy. Okay? All right, people always want to ask me, hey, is this the type of thing that gets detected in logs? Yes. Yes, it is. But what admin reads logs? All right, so now I'm firing up the exact same scan in HP Web Inspect. All right, it's going to get started. Okay, so HP Web Inspect is going to take a little while to get going on my cute little machine. Right now you're on my laptop. But it should give you an idea of what's involved, and then we'll start looking through the vulnerabilities identified in a minute. All right, looks like he's getting going. Okay, now HP Web Inspect is going to do the same thing. You're going to see it crawl the website first, and then after it's done crawling, you're going to see it actually start to test for vulnerabilities. So right now it's still in the crawling stage. So if you get over here, you can see how it's in the crawl stage, where it's got crawl and it's just got a 1 right here. It hasn't gotten into the audit, attack sent, and all that good stuff. So I'm going to scroll down right here. Let's make this a little bit more to where you can actually see it. Okay, now these tabs here are going to be what we're going to toggle through when we want to start seeing different information. You can see that the spidering is starting to happen now. Okay, so there's the spidering of the different pages of the site. Okay, we can start to see what pages it's crawled and what it's actually now starting to audit. Now it's actually starting to launch attacks at the target. And these attacks will be SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all the regular generic stuff. And then as vulnerabilities are identified, they're going to pop up here. All right, let me jump over there. Oops, looks like we found some stuff. Okay, so it's looking, so far you're starting to find some stuff. Let me go down here and click on vulnerabilities. So it's looked like he found some ASP.NET missing error handling. Okay, well, I'll jump over here. Okay. Looks like this scanner found the same sort of thing, right? Some ASP.NET error message stuff. So far, it looks like the scanners have both found the same vulnerability. Okay. All right, and as we look down here, it looks like it's starting to find more stuff. So he's definitely finding error handling issues, unhandled exception, unhandled exception. Well, it looks like you found a cross-frame scripting vulnerability. Okay, now cross-frame scripting is another vulnerability often called clickjacking. So if we jump over here, well, it doesn't look like Acunetics found the actual clickjacking or cross-frame scripting, but he did find clickjacking X-frame options header missing, which would be what actually prevents it. So depending on how the tester wanted to classify this, you could say that they're either the same or they're related. Okay. Now, a quick little difference is HP Web Inspect is classifying that cross-frame scripting vulnerability as are they classifying it as a medium or a high? Let's see. Yeah, it looks like they're classifying that as a medium. Yep, they're calling it a medium. Whereas Acunetics is calling it a low. So this will be up to you, the tester, to really kind of figure that out and classify that for the customer. Looks here like HP Web Inspect has found an SQL injection. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, you see that I'm right-clicking on it right now, and now I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say I want to review the vulnerability. Okay, now while that's taking a while, I'm going to flip back over here. Looks like Acunetics is a little behind right now. Which doesn't look like he's found the same SQL injection yet, so we'll give him some time and we'll come back to him. So we'll see if the same SQL injections are identified here in Acunetics. Let's jump back to Web Inspect and let's look at that review vulnerability information. Okay, we're really beating up my poor little laptop here. Okay, so yeah, that definitely looks like an SQL injection. All right, so they found it in bookdetail.aspx ID equals 2, %09 and %09 left parent select %09 count asterisk from %09 from %09 spittable, and this looks like this is just how they terminate the query. All right, and where are they saying it's actually vulnerable? They're saying it's vulnerable as a get parameter. It's not a post parameter. Here's the initial request. There's the actual page. Okay. All right, so now that we've got this, you see how I can click here and I can say I want to see the request. So you can see there's the injection right there. Now I can click here and I can say, okay, show me the response that the server gave. The server gave this 500 internal server error, and then it gave this invalid object named spittable. Very good. All right, and then here on the vulnerability, he just gives a good little description of what SQL injection is. Now, this is what's different about a commercial product. You see how it's got this really long pretty explanation and the fix, and here's what you tell the developers. Here's some sample code, right? You see how it's got this huge long story that's multiple pages long of just stuff. Now, most of us who are testers think that this is pretty much worthless, but the tool is $28,000 a year, so they got to have a lot of fluff to justify the cost. So definitely pretty cool. What I'm going to do right here is I'm going to right click here, and let's see if it gives me the option to copy the URL. Will my computer catch up to me? My computer is just way too slow running two scanners at the same time. Yeah, for the record, I don't usually do this from my laptop. I have a server where I run both of these tools from, but I was kind of hoping that for the purpose of making the video, it wouldn't be so bad, but it's just a little too slow. So you're just going to have to trust me. Okay, so he found SQL injection in these two pages. This one's a GET request, this one's a POST request. And then we'll come back to Acunetics. And Acunetics seems to be running a little slower, even though we started Acunetics first. We might have to come back a little later and see if he found those same SQL injections. All right, well, let's go look at those. So I'll go here. Here's the page. Here's book detail. And it's ID equals 2. Okay, server's still alive. That's good. I'll insert my single quote. Yeah, that's definitely SQL injection. See that? Yeah, that's definitely SQL injection. Here's the SQL statement. And then let's make a quick test to see if it's injectable. Let's go or select user like this. And we'll see if it says the database username right there. Yeah, it is. Okay, so that's our database username. And then let's see if we can grab the version. Yeah, that's pretty bad. SQL Server 2012, Windows NT 6.2, that's Server 2008. Looks like it's running Hyper-V. Okay, nice little 64-bit server. All right. Okay. This sucker's just slow today, isn't it? All right, well, let's stop the web inspect because that might speed up Acunetics. Okay, so as the scanners would run, they'd probably find there's also some cross-site scriptings in here too in this site. Okay, I found the cross-frame scripting. There's definitely cross-site scripting as well. Okay, and those would show up. I know both scanners detect those, but I just don't want to take that time. You know what? Let's move on, and I'll come back to this, and I'll show you in a little while. That way I can let them keep running. Back to that whole thing of are we stealthy or not? Look, I'm at 17,000 HTTP requests for a website that's basically 10, 15 pages, right? That's a lot of traffic for a pretty simple website. Okay, so I'll come back to the scanners in a minute. After you've done all of your automated stuff, or depending if you're in a real pen test and you're kind of pressed for time, which we usually are, while the scanners are running, I do my manual stuff. So how do I do manual testing? When I test a website for application vulnerabilities, what I do is I like to ask myself 3 questions. So on every single page of the website, I ask 3 questions. And if the answer to one of those 3 questions is yes, that's how I know what attack path to go down. I find a lot of people, they always ask me, like, hey, Joe, I see that you're messing with this site. How did you know to check right there for SQL injection? How did you know when you looked right here to check for cross-site scripting? What made you think to try this right there? I find that I get a lot of those types of questions. So I ended up kind of developing a little methodology. Now, this isn't some formal thing. This is just what I do. So while the scanners are running, these are the kind of things that I do. I ask myself 3 questions. So the first question is, does the website talk to a database? So while I'm looking at it, can I figure out if the page that I'm looking on is making queries from a database? The second question is, can I or someone else see what I type? So right at the page that I'm looking on, can I figure out if this website takes in data and eventually shows it back to the user later on? That's the real key here. Can you take in data and eventually display it back to the user? And if you can, you've got a good chance for abuse of trust vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, HTTP request splitting, response splitting, all those types of, request smuggling, response splitting, all those different types of cross-frame scripting, clickjacking, all those different types of vulnerabilities come from that same root cause, right? Just like for does it talk to a database, that's the same root cause for SQL injection, LDAP injection, XPath injection, ORM injection, all of those, right? It's the same root cause, right? Is there parameter passing that allows you to mess with it, or is there some sort of data entry field that eventually gets displayed back to the user? So that's why I asked those 2 questions, because they all start from the same place. And then the last one is, does the page reference a file? While I'm looking at the website, does it reference some sort of file on the local file system? And if it does, can I get it to reference something on the local file system or on a remote file system? So let's go see that in action. All right, so when I'm looking at a page, the first thing I want to know is it talking to a database? So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for parameter passing. While I'm looking at the website, I say, okay, do I see parameter passing? So let's take a look. So I'm looking at this website. I'll just go to the home page right now. So while I'm here on the home page, the first thing I want to do is I want to look up in the address bar and see, do I see parameter passing right here? Right now, there's nothing there. So the answer to question number 1 is no. I don't see anything there. Now, an example of what I would be looking for right there would be something like this. So here you can see, here's the page name, question mark, here's the parameter name, and then this ID, that's what we call the parameter name. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. The question mark denotes parameter passing. ID is the parameter name, and 1 is the parameter value. So as we're looking at that, we can say, okay, so page name.aspx, that's the page name. Question mark equals parameter passing, so it lets you know that the web server front end is talking to the database back end. Then we see ID, which is the parameter name, and 1, which is the parameter value. So this is what's being requested from the back end database, right? So what we want to do is we want to insert some sort of single quote right here. And then we want to see if it goes boom. Now right here, you can see that it threw an SQL error. So this is SQL injection. So what you're going to do right there is you're going to insert SQL commands. So now I insert SQL commands right here. Because the backend data store is SQL, once you insert a quote, that breaks the query. You insert a single quote, it breaks the query, and then upon breaking the query, you insert your own commands to see if you can make the database execute commands that you want it to run instead of the commands it was programmed to run. That's SQL injection. Now, that's SQL injection and the GET request. Anything in the address bar is what we're going to call the GET request. But let's say I go to this login page right here. So I go to this login page, and you're going to see that I'm going to type hello and hello inside of the username and password box. I'm going to click right there. I'm going to click right here. And when I say go, you see how it goes boom? That's obviously another SQL injection, right? If you take a look right there, that's XML injection. And you can see that when it was inserted, it got inserted with one quote on one side, two quotes on the other side, one quote on the inside, two quotes on the other side. That means that quote that I sent in immediately after the word hello is what got passed to the database, and that's what made them blow up. So when I look for parameter passing in the GET request, you can see it. In the POST request, you need something to see it. So that's something that we use. It's usually called a proxy. I'm in a proxy right now. This proxy is called Burp Suite. So what I want to do is I want to find the POST request. And when I look inside of the POST request, here you can see this is where the actual parameters are. They're a little hard to read. So you can click parameters, and now we can actually look, and you can see in my post parameter names, post request, parameter names, here's the parameter values. And you can see that I inserted the single quote each time with a single quote each time. So here's in the user, there's in the password. Okay. Now you would look at that error message, and that's what would lead you to go, oh, it's got XML injection. Okay. Okay. The next thing that I would do is I would look for places where I could see what I type. So question number 2, is there anywhere in the website, a blog, a forum, a contact us form, a search box, anywhere, an instant messenger window, an SMS, anywhere where we can insert something and then the person, whether either us or someone else, can see what we inserted? So I'm going to try that right here. So I'm going to do a script alert. I'm going to see if I can get some code execution. You see this pop-up box? This code execution, this pop-up box proves that you can execute code. And the code that you can execute is JavaScript. So this vulnerability is cross-site scripting. So you would look for that everywhere where the website gave you a place to insert data. So you see these search boxes over here, you do it here. This advanced search box over here. This newsletter sign-up form, you do it here. Anywhere where you can insert data, you'd insert that script alert, try to see if it pops back up and gives you that cross-site scripting pop-up. And you do that on every single page of the site. So on every single page of the website, I look to see if there's parameter passing, like this. See that? If there is, I insert a single quote right there. When I get my error message back, if the error message says SQL, then I know it's SQL injection. If the error message says LDAP, then I know it's LDAP injection. If the error message says ORM or XML or XPath or whatever it is, that's the type of injection that you're dealing with, then you need to find the appropriate syntax to talk to that backend data store. That's really all it is. It's not that complicated. Now, why do people tell you that they just love Burp Suite, Paros, Rat Proxy, Zap, tampered data, all these other different types of tools that are called proxies? The reason that people like proxies so much is when it's time to deal with a post request. I'm going to click the login page right now. And do you notice that there's a page name, login.aspx, but there's no question mark, something equals something right here. So this is not a GET request. This is what's called a POST request. Now with your POST request, you're going to need something that's going to allow you to see it, mess with it, interact with it. And what we use for that is a proxy. So the proxy is how we catch these different requests, and that's why you saw me using something called Burp Suite. So can you see every single HTTP request that was given by the server is tracked with Burp Suite? And then I can interact with it and change it all I want. Okay? So this is why you're going to find people like to use proxies, because it gives them a chance to say, okay, now that I saw this request, I want to mess with it, especially if it's a post request. All right, let's jump back here and see if the scanner found anything. All right. Looks like Acunetics found some stuff. So it looks like Acunetics found a blind SQL injection, and it looks like Acunetics found a regular SQL injection. Okay, well, where did he find it at? He found it at bookdetail.aspx, and he found it in the parameter name ID. Okay, so that's the same one that I'm messing with right here. So he found it in bookdetail.aspx with the parameter name ID. So the scanner found the same one that I'm messing with right now. Bookdetail.aspx, parameter name is ID, and this is where he found the injection at. Okay, great. Okay, there's one other type of attack vector that I like to look for, and that's does the page reference a file? And I'll show you what I mean. Let's say I go right here and I click on the About Us page. So you see how it says show file.php, file name equals about.txt? Can you see that it's directly referencing a file on the local file system? As soon as you see that, you should immediately say to yourself, well, can it read the Etsy password file? And in this case, yeah. Can you see that it reads the Etsy password file? Okay, and you can see that you want to see, can we read other files? How about the mot.d? Okay, it doesn't look like there's a mot.d. Let's try Etsy issue. Yep, so Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.5. Yep, looks like you can read the Etsy issue file. Okay, so these are the types of things that we want to see, right? Can we do what's called a local file include? Now, if you can do what's called a local file include, then what we want to do is we want to see, how about I just try and grab a text file out from the internet somewhere. URL, hello, text, hello, and file type, txt. All right, so I found a text file out on the internet. The text file just says hello world. Okay, it's just a text file. So you see that I'm going to grab that text file, and now instead of referencing a local file, I'm going to try and reference a remote file, just like that. And it worked. You see that? File name, and I made it point to a remote file. And now the contents of that remote file have displayed right in here. See that? That text has now shown up here. That's called a remote file include. In other words, you were able to take text from somewhere else on the internet and have it be pulled down and embedded into the site that you're testing, right? That's a remote file include. But you see that it all comes from the same three places. So those three places for me are, does it talk to a database, right? The way I figure that out is I look for parameter passing. Does it, can I see what I type, right? Input box, search box, anything. That's where I try cross-site scripting. And then the third one is, does it reference a file? And if it does, I want to see if it can read local files. If it can read local files, I want to see if it can read remote files. So for me, this kind of gives me a framework to follow. Now, I don't want to say that these are the only things that I do, but it's the gist of what I do. It gives you a way to go through the pages while the scanner's running. Scanner's running, and while it's running, I go over and I do my manual thing. I go back and I look at the scanner every few hours to see if the scanner picked up something that I didn't pick up. Maybe the scanner found something and you go, wow, he found something that I didn't. Okay, so that leads us to our next subject, which I really don't cover in a lot of classes, but I figured for this class it would make the most sense, and that's fuzzing. Okay, it looks like we found our cross-site scripting, post search, and it's in the same place, default.aspx. Okay, so web inspect found the cross-site scripting. Let's see if Acunetics found it yet. Acunetics hasn't found it yet. They're both still running. All right, so let's go with the fuzzing. Once you know or you suspect, that's probably something I want to check a little harder for SQL injection. So you go, okay, well, I go and I look for something called the FuzzDB. So I look for the FuzzDB, and the FuzzDB is a project that's out on GitHub now. It got moved from Google Code. And what it is it's a huge list of attack strings that you can send to a target. So let's say, for example, I'll go here. Let's say you suspect, that this particular parameter is injectable. How about this one? Okay, I suspect that this parameter is injectable. Book detail.aspx $ID. I think it's injectable. So what you do is in your proxy, you find that parameter. Here's book detail.aspx $ID equals 1. I'm going to right click on it, and inside of Burp Suite, I'm going to send it to something called the intruder. So I send it over to intruder. Intruder is one of the other tabs here in Burp Suite. This is it. So I'm going to click the intruder tab. Now the host is the same target you see me messing with. The position is going to be right here. So right there is where I want the attack to go. Now I have to list the payload. So I click payloads, and now I can load a file, or I can just paste the actual string of payloads in right here. So where do those payloads come from? Those payloads come from the fuzz database, which is right here. So let's say I want to go and I want to try SQL injection. So I'll go to the SQL injection page, and I'll say, I'm looking for just detecting SQL injection, and I want to test for MS-SQL. So he comes up with this list of payloads. So this is what it's going to put here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click raw. I'm just going to grab all of these. Okay, and just because I'm lazy, I'm just going to paste them right into Burp Suite right here. Okay. So I say paste, and then all those payloads go right there. Now I just come over here and I say start the attack. Now for every one of those, he's going to run that payload in that particular position. So you see this is going to pop up right here, and then it's going to go one by one through all of those payloads. Okay, so now we see that it's going through all these payloads, and we can see that in each case it's getting an error code 500. So that's definitely something worth looking at. But it doesn't look to me like the attack is actually working. Let's see if we can take a look. So when I click on one, here's the request that was sent. ID equals 1. Let's see the parameters. Okay. All right, that's just a generic request. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, ID equals single quote exec master XP command shell. Okay, let's see the response. The response was internal error, timeout expired, connection pool stuff is all dead. Okay, now if you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm going through each one of these. And for each one of these that I'm going through, I'm actually looking at the error messages. Now, sometimes if you're new, you might want to actually go over here and say render. And the reason that you might want to go over and choose render is just because it's a little easier to just look at what the actual web page looks like. Yeah, that looks bad. Okay. Now these are good. Yeah, that's definitely bad. Okay, but that's not an injection. Okay, right here, select version. That's not working. Okay, it's echoing back the string, but the data isn't coming back. So what I probably do is I probably want to clean this sucker up a little bit. So I'm going to say clear. And a little while ago, I was making one of these little SQL injection fuzz sheets. So what I'm doing here is I took a couple of SQL injections, and you see that I've got some with single quotes, some with the actual number, right? And then let's do those, because I think that's the problem. I think it's injecting, but it actually needs the parameter value to work. And this is kind of one of those trial and error things. Sometimes you're going to see, do you see out here I put parentheses here? This is what happens in the real world. You end up having to mess with these injections. Sometimes I put parentheses and a single quote. Sometimes you have to mess with these injections to make them work. So I'm going to select all of these right here. Okay, I'm going to close that guy. Let's go right back here. I'm going to send this guy to the intruder again. Now jump right into payloads. And let me just paste all this right in. Okay, and then let's start the attack. Okay, so the action is happening. Okay, let's get over here and let's look at these suckers, huh? So I'm going to say render. Okay, I got nothing there. Okay. All right. All right, when I render that, that's just the book. All right. Or one convert into user. He doesn't like the word or. He doesn't like the word or. He doesn't like the word or. So all of these, where it's a space and the word or, he doesn't like those. So let's check the ones where he's got the single quote first. Unclose quotation mark after the character string, tick or one equals convert int user. Okay, all those got the same thing. All right, so let's check it with the one. Okay, it's got a connection pool error. Okay, that's not you guys, that's the actual database throwing errors. Okay. All right, now right here, period elapsed obtaining the connection pool. It's just too many connections to that. So I'm going to stop that. I'm going to give it about 30 seconds for that database to reboot. The server's rebooting now. Let's make it a little quick check. As soon as the sucker comes back, I'll launch it again. Come on, buddy, come on back. Yep, he's back. All right, so now that he's back, let's go ahead and let's choose to launch. Say yeah. All right, let's get down to these ones with the 1. Check the response. Right there, value DBO. Yep. If I check render, yep, database owner. Grab the DB name, he didn't like that. Here's the version, Microsoft SQL Server 2012. Those injections are working now. So this is working really, really good. Okay, that's a successful exploitation of SQL injection. That's good. That's really good. Let's jump back and check the scanner. Okay, he still hasn't found that cross-site scripting. He'll eventually find it. He's still running. Let's check web inspect. Okay, web inspect is the web inspect found the cross-site scripting and the SQL injection. Okay, doesn't look like he found the XML injection yet. Have to let him run for a little while. Okay, well, we've been recording for a long time, so let's stop here. So we talked about that. Ask yourself 3 questions. Let's summarize, huh? So you run 2 vulnerability scanners against the target. Acunetics and Web Inspect is what I do, but you can choose your 2 scanners of choice, right? If they have to be free, that's free. If you have to run 1 commercial and 1 free, that's fine. I've done that many times on tests before I got budget for real products. Okay, then you do your manual stuff, right? Does it talk to a database? If it does, insert your single quote. Can I or someone else see what I type? Does the page reference a file? Okay, we already talked about how to look for parameter passing. We already talked about how to look for a place where someone can see where you type. We already talked about what to do when it references a file. Here's what you insert. Okay, and then we talked about the fuzz database, and you can load that fuzz database. When you find a parameter that you want to mess with, then you just go ahead and you load it into Intruder. Okay. All right, so let's stop there. We'll call that for web app, and then we'll move on to client-side testing next. All right, well, I hope you learned a lot, guys. I hope this was helpful. All right, looks like Acunetics is finished, and then it looks like HP Web Inspector will be finishing. Okay. All right, guys, let's stop there. I hope you found that section helpful, and then we'll move on to client-side testing next. All right, hello Pentester Academy, and welcome to the final video in this series. Well, I think we've done pretty good. We've gone through the entire process of penetration testing, not so much trying to get knee deep into the nitty-gritty of the hacking portion, but like what are the actual steps that I go through. I'm going to make some more video series for you where we're going to get a little bit more detailed in the actual hacking steps themselves, like more tactical stuff. I consider this video to be a little bit, this video series to be a little bit more strategic. But we'll definitely get there. And we're going to cover some other subjects like malware and reverse engineering and things like that. So finally, let's wrap this bad boy up. Please forgive me, this is going to be a bit of a long video, but I'm going to try and move through it quickly. What we're talking about right now is threat modeling and reporting. Now, the biggest thing that I would tell you has been most influential to my career is my ability to write and to speak. Way more important than my ability as a hacker, as a pen tester. Someone gave me a quote, and it was my good friend, his name is Anthony Williams. He gave me a quote, and he says, be a consultant, not an insultant. In other words, your job as a pen tester is to help. Your job is not to laugh at customers and tell them how much they suck. Remember, this is about them. It's not about you. It's not about how good of a hacker you are. Quite frankly, you really don't need to be a very good hacker to be a good pen tester. What you have to be is willing to help. You're here to help this customer do better with their security, hopefully at a cost that's reasonable and in line with their business practices and their business goals. That's what we're going to talk about right now. The next things that I think you should be working on, in addition to your technical stuff, is your ability to deal with people. I mean, quite frankly, I really think you should learn about sales. I really think you should learn about public speaking. I really think you should become a better writer. And then the other thing I think you need to focus on is you need to focus on business metrics. At least a basic accounting. You should know what EBIT and EBITDA, and you should know what total cost of ownership is. You should know that a customer's goal is to, increase revenue, reduce cost, or increase market share. You should understand that, and you need to understand how the security things that you're talking about impact his business goals, because that's all he cares about. So for me, I like to use something called threat modeling. And the reason I use threat modeling is because it gives me a language that I can use. It gives me a way to talk about the problem and help me put the problem in context. So I use two threat modeling methods. One is called Stride, and one is called Dread. Now, there are plenty of others out there. There's Octave and CVSS and tons of other ones. But I like Stride and I like Dread. Not to say that they're the best, they're just two that I prefer. Now, there's some debate. Oops, sorry, I thought I had my phone off. Now, there's some debate that these models are on their way out, and that may or may not be true. I know Microsoft, although Microsoft was the driving force behind Stride and Dread, is really kind of going to something a little bit more comprehensive now. And I'm not really a fan of that. The reason I'm not a fan of that is because I like that Stride and Dread keeps things very simple. Because when you're talking to a customer, that's really what it's all about. It's how well I can simplify the problem. So let's jump down into that. Let me just make sure that I'm recording. I could have sworn that I hit record, but okay, I'm recording. Boy, don't ever get old. Okay, so let's just jump down in here. Okay, the first thing that you need to do as a security consultant is you need to be able to figure out, can we identify the customer's assets? What's important? Okay, what are you trying to protect? Is it your data? Is it a particular business practice? Is it a particular set of servers that process revenue? Like, what's important to you? Okay, now what are we talking about? Is it network assets? Is it hosts? Is it applications? Databases? Is it particular methodology and intellectual property? Like, what is it that you are trying to protect? And let's start there. As soon as we know what is important to this business, a lot of times as an attacker, you find, hey, I can break into this. And then the customer goes, so? Because you're breaking into something that's not important to him. So we got to be able to figure out, what do you have? Let's take inventory of what you have. Then we say, okay, now let's look at the vulnerabilities. Think about like you're trying to get homeowners insurance or renters insurance. Before this guy can tell you, well, I'm going to give you $500,000 of insurance for your home or $10 million of insurance in your home, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out what you got in the house. Do you have a really nice set of golf clubs? Do you have some really rare artwork? What do you have in your home? Jewelry. What do you have in your home that's of value? Once we know what do you have in your home that's of value, then we can say, all right, let's go and let's look at the doors, the windows. Let's look at how close you are to major freeways. Are you in a hurricane or tornado zone? These are potential vulnerabilities, places where someone could leverage a problem to get at your assets. Then we need to figure out who the threats are. And that may be based on the assets themselves. So certain types of assets lend themselves to certain types of threats, right? Because, hey, cybercrime, they tend to want to steal money. If you have intellectual property that really gives you a competitive advantage, then the threats may be your business competitors. If you have intellectual property because you're like a defense industrial base, uh, then the threats are going to be nation state actors, people from foreign countries who want to do damage to your network, so that they can have some sort of strategic advantage over your industrial base. We need to figure that out, because that lends us to understanding that the level of sophistication that you're going to need defensively. If you're just a tiny little flower shop, let's just keep it real. I hope I'm not offending anybody who runs a little flower website. You're just a tiny little flower shop, you deliver flowers. Well, super sophisticated hackers aren't breaking into you. But if you're a multi-billion-dollar bank, then you're going to have some pretty skilled hackers going after you. That goes back to the assets. What are we trying to protect? Once we know what we're trying to protect, now we can start looking at the vulnerabilities. Okay, well, here's what they have. They got a lot of money, or they got a lot of intellectual property, or a lot of competitive intelligence that would really be helpful, to someone who has the means, that really wants to get at that, that they really may want to go after it. So that lends us to understanding who's going to want to get it, right? So it's this overlapping of these three spheres, right? Your assets, your vulnerabilities, and your threats. Where those three overlap is risk, right? Risk is the likelihood that it's going to happen. How likely is this vulnerability to actually be exploited in the real world, right? That's really what's going on, because I always tell everybody there's a big difference between what's possible and what's probable, right? It's possible that I could get married to Halle Berry. Of course, it's possible, but it's not probable. I'm a good-looking guy, but I don't think my chances with Halle Berry are that good. And that's just a matter of being really understanding of your environment and all the contributing factors, right? Hacking is the same way. It's possible to break into anything, right? It's possible that a super skilled hacker could break into your environment. Of course it's possible, but is it likely? And if so, we would have some supporting information. We would say, well, that hacker would want access to these assets, or that business competitor has the money to pay a hacker who's good enough to get at it, to get at these assets. Okay? So that's really kind of how this all rounds out. Once we do that, we identify all the risk and then we prioritize them. So here are, based on your vulnerabilities and your assets, we go, here's your assets. You have these 10 things that are important. Here's your vulnerabilities. You have these 100 ways to get to the assets. And then, based on the assets you have and the vulnerabilities, we think these are your threats. These are the threat agents or threat actors who want to do something to you. They're going to be the ones who are going to take advantage of these vulnerabilities to get to your assets. And then we prioritize them. Okay, more than likely, you're going to be really at risk to malware. More than likely, you're going to be really at risk to, administrative errors because you don't have good processes in place, whatever the cases may be. And you prioritize what is most likely to happen. That is what we use. That information is what we use to build a risk rating. So a risk rating is how likely it is to happen. And based on how likely it is to happen, I figure out, if I'm that executive, how much money I'm going to spend, how much time I'm going to spend, how much people, right, time, money, people, what resources I'm going to allocate to this problem. If I'm going to allocate resources to this problem at all, because that's really what your job is as a security person. So what's threat modeling in a nutshell, right? We wrap up, what do we want to protect? Do we want to protect our identity, our reputation, our financial resources, our privacy? Do we have regulatory information that we're trying to keep a hold of? Availability. Do we just need to be available for our customers, right? Are we a financial environment that's a 5 nines environment? What that means is mandated 99.999 5 nines uptime. We can't be down more than 5 minutes a year. Okay, then how do we decide what to protect? So we're going to have some influencers that motivate us to protect these things, right? And it's going to be laws, regulations, standards, legal agreements, or security policy. Something is the driver for the security that we're going to apply. And it may be a multiple of these factors, but you have to know these things. And this is the difference. If you notice with Pentester Academy all so far, we focused on the deep technical. Now, this is the part that separates you from the low-level consultant who just does the hacking, from the practice manager or the senior team lead, the person who interfaces with the CEO and can also take that technical knowledge, combine it with that what's called GRC, governance, risk, and compliance knowledge, and say, here's what impacts your business. Okay. All right, so let's talk about Stride. The first one that I like to use is Stride. Stride is what I like to say before you build or buy. So before you build a piece of software or before you buy a product that you're going to integrate into your environment, I say you should use Stride. Here's what happens. Company says we're going to build an application, or we're going to buy a particular product. And then they say, well, let's get security involved. I'm being kind of tongue-in-cheek because that never happens. What happens is the product gets purchased, gets bought, gets built, gets deployed. And right before it gets deployed or shortly after it gets deployed, they call security and get security and say, hey, can you take a look at this? And now it's a little too late, right? It's kind of cat's out the bag now. It's kind of hard to put security on this thing now. Well, we all complain about that problem, but there are times when people try to get security involved early, and security gets mad. And you would think that doesn't happen, but it happens a lot. Here's why. You get the business people together, and the business people say, we need this operational capability, because we're trying to do blah, blah, blah and make more money, right? What do they want to do? They want to increase revenue, reduce costs, increase market share. Those are your business goals. So they want to go to a CRM, a customer relationship management piece of software, like Salesforce. Or they want to go to an ERP solution. They want to go to a PeopleSoft type solution, something like that. Well, they decide that they're either going to buy one or build one, and they're going to consolidate huge amounts of business intellectual capital, privacy information, PII, personally identifiable information, all kinds of stuff is going to go into this doggone thing, and it's going to be publicly available and all that. Now, you decide to bring security in on the early meetings of this. Now, the people having this meeting are not technical people. So security gets in the room, and security says something like, okay, well, do you want to do it with Linux, or do you want to do it with Windows? And then, your business people are going to be like, what's Linux? And then your security people are going to say things like, well, do we want it load balanced? Do we want it hosted internationally? How are we going to handle VPNs or encryption? And your business people are going to be like, what's a VPN? What's encryption? They don't know. They haven't decided what the technology is going to be yet. So consequently, they can't answer questions on is it Linux? Is it Windows? Is it load balanced? Is it .NET? Is it Java? Is it PHP? They can't answer those kind of questions. One, they don't know what that stuff is. And then two, because they haven't decided on exactly how the solution is going to be implemented, they can't answer this stuff. They don't know. So security walks out of the meeting, and security is pissed. Security's like, what a waste of time. These guys don't even know what they want. Why did I waste that half hour to an hour in the room? These guys don't know what they want. They don't know what they want. They don't know who's going to own it. They don't know. They don't know. So it's a complete waste of my time. And that's because security isn't outfitted with Stride. Stride gives us a way to handle this. Let's take an example. There is a site on the internet, and it's called mypay.com. I'm pretty sure it's mypay.com. Let's see. Yep. Yeah, MyPay. Right? Okay, so what happens is MyPay is how, if you work for the US military, you get paid. Now think about that. What we used to have is oh, please excuse me, I work with DoD a lot. We used to have something called DFAS, right? So DFAS is the, what is it? Defense Finance and Accounting Service, right? Now, every military base around the world has a DFAS office. Now think about that. Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, right? Every military base. And then you've got Central DFAS, which handles, DFAS for all of the military. So now think about it. They decided to go to this MyPay application where everybody across all military branches, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines around the globe has their payroll consolidated in one online application, and everyone gets paid through electronic funds transfer. So everybody's LES form, leave and earning statement, is handled in MyPay. Not only that, everybody's electronic funds transfers, all your money going that. Now think about it. That's active duty military, all branches of service, and retirees, people who are prior service. So that's hundreds of thousands of people globally distributed. Now think about that. You're sitting in the room and you've got a bunch of generals and a bunch of money people and a bunch of accountants talking about, it would be a lot more effective if we went with a centralized system that was publicly available to everyone all over the world. Now think about it. You've got so many distributed groups in the military. Army does stuff completely different than Navy. Navy does stuff completely different than Air Force. And the whole kit and caboodle. Then you're going to have everybody's social security numbers, mailing address, bank account numbers, their rank, all of that personally identifiable information for everybody in the entire military, right? All branches. That's mind-boggling in terms of risk. So now, as people are having that discussion, when you're looking over at these generals and they're saying, this is what we think we want to do, and you're the security people, now they go, well, what do you think? Well, Stride is what will help you because you can guide the conversation. You can say, okay, generals, let's do this. What we need to know is how important is spoofing on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most important. So spoofing means that you can't pretend to be someone you're not. How important is that on a scale of 1 to 10? You look around the room, most people are going to say 10, because if it's an application that handles financial information for that many hundreds of thousands of people all over the world, I'm thinking you don't want people pretending to be someone they're not, right? So it's pretty easy to go, okay, I can handle that. I can handle that. That's a 10. Now you go, okay, what about tampering? How important is that people can't modify data that they're not authorized to modify? So you go, okay, yeah, I'm thinking on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 10. You go, okay. Now you go, okay, what about repudiation? Repudiation, to repudiate is to deny. You cannot deny that you did something. In other words, it's really about verbose logging and accountability, right? Attribution, verifying that whoever did this is who I think did this. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is that in an application like MyPay? It's probably a 10. Information leakage. Information leakage would be like error messages that let you know, that it's running WordPress or Joomla or Drupal or something like that. Personal data that might be exposed. Now, I'm not talking vulnerability data. Really low-level data that are kind of like breadcrumbs. Well, I don't think that's a 10. It's probably an 8. In this context, right? Now, you may argue about them a little bit, but you can keep the discussion moving. You're probably going to settle on a 7 or an 8. Okay, not too bad. So right now we know that spoofing, 10. Tampering, 10. Information leakage, repudiation, 10. Information leakage, 8. Then we start talking about denial of service. Okay, well, is it a 5 nines environment? Can you not perform business operations if it's down for more than 5 minutes a year, like some financial institutions? No, my pay is down all the time, right? It can be down for an hour or two. So maybe a 9 in terms of denial of service. So it's important that it's reachable. Availability is important, but I wouldn't call it a 10, right? And you have the discussion and people agree. And now elevation of privilege. How important is it that someone who's at one level of user rights cannot escalate privilege to a level above that? You look around the room, the guys go, that's a 10. So now as we rip through this, we go, okay, spoofing, criticality, it's a 10. Tampering, criticality, it's a 10. Repudiation, criticality, it's a 10. Information leakage, maybe an 8. Denial of service, maybe an 8 or a 9, right? Elevation of privilege, 10. Now we wrap that up and we go, okay, guys, meeting over. High five, everybody, right? And we're out, okay? Now, every meeting as we move along and start to figure out what technologies that we want to use. We want to use Java, we want to use .NET, or we want to use Linux or Windows or whatever technologies. As we start to figure out what features we want, the features that you want in the product are what's going to drive the technologies that you use. So as you start to kind of nail down what features that you want, with every meeting, let's say once a week you have a meeting on it, and every week you kind of move forward with what features you want, and slowly you start to come up with what technologies you want. Now that we know this list of technologies that we're starting to be interested in, we can go back to this stride list. And we can say, well, if you're going to implement that technology, J2EE or J2ME or whatever it is, that technology is not really good when it comes to spoofing, which, if you recall, in our previous meeting, we said was a 10, right? Or, as you come down into, denial of service, hey, that type of technology lends itself to denial of service attacks, right? So we're probably going to need to purchase a load balancer or content delivery network or something like that, right? So what Stride does is it frames the conversation, and it gives you language that's not deep technical, so that you can talk to executives, so that you can figure out what they want to do and what they need to do. So here you understand the business goals, and then you can say, now that I understand your business goals, how do I help you get where you want to get, okay, in terms of security? Okay, the next thing is what are called threat or attack trees. And I don't do a whole lot of this, but occasionally I do it. Sometimes customers want you to build a decision tree so that they can visualize what the ramifications of an attack are, right? So you use it when you say, okay, well, if an attacker could do this, he would probably go this way. If he couldn't do that, he would go this way, right? I find that a lot of customers, because they're not technical and they obviously aren't hackers, it's kind of, you find that they ask you questions like, okay, when you saw that, how'd you know to try this? And what made you know to try cross-site scripting here? How did you know you could bypass the firewall here, but you couldn't here? And that's what these decision trees, these threat maps kind of build out, where you can kind of say, okay, because of this, an attacker could go this way. Because of this, an attacker could go this way. And then at the bottom of it, at the bottom of that chart, you want to have, these are the impacts of it, right? Because no one cares about geekinese, they care about the impact. If this were to happen, what would the impact be? All right. Now, here's the one that I use the most. Remember, Stride is when the customer is deciding to buy something or build something. So you're there as a security consultant, and the customer says, this is what we're thinking about doing. Can you help us with this? So I'm not literally hacking into it. He hasn't bought it yet. He hasn't built it yet. But I'm helping him frame the discussion, him or her. You're helping them frame the discussion. You're giving them the way to attack the problem, right? Okay, dread is different. Dread is, I have now done the security assessment. And of all the stuff that I found, what do you start on first? What do you ignore? What do we say? I want to do this week, this next month, this next quarter, this next year. How do you come up with that list? And that's what dread is for. Dread helps you figure out criticality. In other words, how bad is this problem? Okay, look, doc, I've been going to the doctor and I know that I have chest pain or back pain or whatever. Now that you're there talking to the doctor, what you want to know, you already know it hurts. You want to know, how bad is it, doc? What am I dealing with here? Do I got 6 months to live? Do I just got to change my diet? What am I dealing with here, doc? That's what dread is for. Dread helps you break down how bad it is. So dread breaks down into damage potential, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and discoverability. So when you have a problem, what's the damage potential of this vulnerability? If this guy exploits this buffer overflow, what does he get? If this guy exploits this cross-site scripting or this SQL injection, what does he get? How bad will it be if it's exploited? Was he going to get access to the entire system? Is he going to get access to the database? Is he going to get privileged access, user level access? Is he just going to get some information about us? How bad will it be? That's the D, and it's on a scale of 1 to 10. Full administrative access to the system, the app, is a 10. User level access is a 5, right? To kind of give you some gap there so you can kind of figure out how bad is this. Okay, reproducibility, right? Is it really hard to do, right? If it's really difficult to do, and an example of really difficult to do may be an attack only works in a timing window. So let's say this application does batch processing every Friday. So you found a vulnerability, but the vulnerability can only be exploited every Friday. So the reproducibility is not very high, all right? It's not like every time you try it, it works. So it has a very low reproducibility as opposed to something that you found with Google hacking. Every freaking time you try it, sucker just works, right? You don't need privileged access to do. You can just do it right in a web browser. That's a 10, right? As opposed to something that you need privileged access or you need a timing window, that's probably a 5. Exploitability, right? Are there automated tools to perform this exploit? So if the attack can be done with Metasploit, then the exploitability is 10. If the attack can only be done by a guy who's a pretty skilled programmer, right, then the attack is probably a 5 or a 3 in exploitability, right? Affected users. If it affects your whole customer base, or if it's default users, right, all users, it's a 10, right? And this is important because you can have the exact same vulnerability on your revenue-producing e-commerce server, and you can have the exact same vulnerability on a laptop of a person who's on vacation. If you just go by this vulnerability as a high, medium, or low, affected users doesn't really, there's no context of affected users. You don't know, hey, this is my revenue-producing users. This guy's just on vacation, right? Like, it's the same vulnerability, but because this affects more users or affects users that are more important, that's what makes it more important, right? And discoverability. How easy is it to find this problem? Is it something that you can find with Nessus, with Nexpose? Like, can you find this with a vulnerability scan? If you can, that's a really high discoverability. That's like a 10 in discoverability. Can you find this? Would it be the type of thing that you could only find if you were a developer on the project? If that's the case, then discoverability is actually pretty low, right? You'd have to be a developer who worked here. So it's a 3 or it's a lower, even lower than that, right? So what do you do with these numbers? Well, I'm going to take an old penetration test sample report. So here's an old penetration test sample report from when I worked at Rapid7. And you'll see that it goes through our scope and methodology. I'm going to scroll down through this. Okay, so it says, how do you understand the results? Right? So rather than report each missing patch as a vulnerability, we use DREAD so that we can describe the risk and the individual findings, and we can group them together. So we do the external assessment. We use the same methodology that I've been teaching you the whole series of videos, right? So here's the services that we scanned, right? Here are these IP addresses. For each of these IP addresses, we found these open ports. These are the services that were running on those ports, and this is the platform that they were run on. So now we did everything I've shown you, right? The external assessment, the website assessment. Now we get down to the findings and recommendations. So in the findings and recommendations, we use DREAD. Just like I said, damage potential is a 10, right? If the attacker can gain full administrative access, it's a 10. If he can gain non-privileged access, it's a 7, right? Sensitive information, it's a 4. Reproducibility, you see that? So we have this grid, right? Now what you do is you total up all these, and then we have a criticality rating. If the vulnerability or group of vulnerabilities adds up between 40 and 50, then it's critical. Okay? A critical finding of vulnerability should be considered immediately for review and resolution, meaning you want to fix that sucker today, this week, now, right? Not later, now. You mean now? Yes, now, right? Now, if we start adding up all that stuff, damage potential's a 5, reproducibility's a 3, you start getting into that kind of stuff where this bad boy adds up to be just severe, then maybe we want to fix this next week, right? Maybe we want to fix this next month. What we want to do as security consultants is help the customer understand what he needs to do when, right? Because if you give somebody a huge vulnerability report, they have hundreds potentially of vulnerabilities, or in some cases, thousands of vulnerabilities. What they need to do is they need to come up with a battle plan. What stuff am I going to fix? When? How soon do I need to be getting this stuff fixed? And what's likely to be exploited? That's the risk component. The next component that customers often need to know is, well, how difficult is it for me to fix it? What's the remediation effort level? So for me to fix this, can I fix it in a day? Is it going to take me several days? Is it going to take me weeks, months, lots of money? Like, do I need to get really skilled consultants to fix it? Programmers? Like, what's my remediation effort level? That's a big deal. Sometimes the remediation effort level may be more than what the impact of the vulnerability being exploited would do. Let's say, for example, if you were to exploit a system and it would cause $10,000 worth of damage, but the remediation level to fix it was $100,000, you wouldn't fix it. You wouldn't. You just wouldn't. And that's the part that's difficult as a consultant. It's trying to get people to understand that you want to say, okay, here's the DREAD score, right? And now I've looked this up. And to fix this problem, it's going to take you 2-3 months. It's going to take you 100 grand. And not only is it 2-3 months, it's 2-3 months of some very skilled people to do this, which you don't have on hand. Or if you do have them, you obviously have them because you need them to do other stuff, not fix this. So that's a real problem. This is why you need to know business, because you can't just look at a problem and go, hey, this is vulnerable, fix it. It just doesn't work that way because we don't have enough time, money, and people to fix everything and run a business. It's just not possible. If you dump all your money fixing all these security vulnerabilities, you're probably not putting your money into marketing, finance, research and development, business operations. You got other things as a CEO that you need to focus on. Security is just one of those things, right? It's kind of like having a bunch of kids, right? You have 5, 6 kids. You got to feed all of your kids. You have to clothe all of your kids. You have to shelter all of your kids. You can't just say, I'm only worried about my kids' security, not my kids' eating, right? I'm only worried about my kids' security, not my kids' education, right? You got to really kind of look at it in that context. Because that's really what's going on when you're running a business. So you as a security consultant need to be able to put this security information in business terms so that this customer understands you're trying to help him run his business. You're not just trying to be the guy who just, cries wolf, right? That's not our goal here. Our goal is to help him run his business. Okay, so here we can see that we've got some findings and we've got a buffer overflow in SSH and it's a critical, right? That means the dread score is between 40 and 50. You've got some IIS vulnerabilities that are severe, right? So that means they're in the 30s, 30 to 40. Okay. So when you actually get down to the actual breakdown, can you see here you get a dread score summary? You say, okay, it's critical, it's in SSH, it's in this version. Then you go, here's the damage potential, here's the reproducibility. The remediation effort is low. Well, that's pretty good. That probably means that, hey, all I have to do is reply patch. And you're going to find that once I started using Dread, the reports got smaller. We used to give customers pen test reports that would be like 200 pages. That was normal. Now, typical pen test reports like 30, 40 pages. It's pretty light, because you can group several vulnerabilities together, or you can group multiple hosts, right? So you see right here where it says effects, right? I could have 10, 15 computers right here. So it makes it really, really nice because now you can say, okay, this vulnerability affects this many systems. So now they don't have 10 vulnerabilities across 10 systems. They have one vulnerability across 10 systems, right? It's just so much easier to convey information and much quicker. This is why I love Dread. So you're seeing that when I build pen test reports, this really helped me. It really helped me for each vulnerability you identify to give that customer a Dread score. So in a very short amount of space on the page, you give them the meat of what they need to know. So a customer can go, okay, this is important to me, this is important to my business, here's how tough it's going to be for me to fix it, let's get in there and let's do this, right? So I'm hoping that this really helped you. For me, Stride and Dread, it oh my God, changed my life like Jesus, hallelujah. It just really made things so much easier for me. Now again, you're gonna meet people who really don't like Stride and Dread. They don't feel that it's comprehensive enough. They feel that it's too subjective. Sometimes it's difficult to really get the customer's information about affected users or discoverability. Some of these bits of information or damage potential. Some of these things are kind of hard to get because the customer, you may be performing a remote assessment. You may not know a lot of the business context of this particular component in the network or in the app. So this is why you see some people complain about this, but you're going to see that those people have the same complaints about CVSS, Octave, all of them. It's really hard to make any risk rating with limited or worse inaccurate information, right? You don't have all the contributing factors, so it's hard to give a good risk rating. And the only thing I can tell you is, welcome to the real world. That's what you're here for. You are the consultant. You're the consultant. Pick up the phone and call. You're the consultant. What do you mean, hey, the customer didn't give this to me? Ask, right? If you ask and the customer doesn't know, hey, let's sit down. Let's see if we can figure it out. If we can't, write that in the report. I'm giving this rating, this risk rating, based on the information that I know. That's not hard to say. Say it. Based on the information that I have at hand, based on the information that I was able to obtain. This is what I think your risk is. That's fine. That's fine. All right. So let's wrap this bad boy up. The love of my life when it comes to risk rating, stride and tread. These bad boys really, really, really helped me so much. It gave me a way to communicate. And when you can communicate with your customer, you're going to find that the whole world opens up. And you may not be the best hacker, which was my case. There were a lot of people who were much better pen testers than I was. But I found myself getting a whole lot more high-profile clients. I found myself speaking at conferences when they didn't. I found myself making more money than them. I found myself getting more access to people. I found myself getting called back to do more pen tests than they did. And what kind of blew me away was communication is the key. It's not really about how technical you are. If you're a good communicator and you can put things in terms that the customer understands, you're going to find that your business is going to grow. You're going to find that you're going to get raises. You're going to find that you become more valuable to the organization. Communication is the key. So let's wrap this series up. I thank you, Pentester Academy, for putting up with me. Vivek, my buddy, I love you, man. You're my man. You're my man, 50 grand. And guys, Pentester Academy, you have absolutely the best trainer in the industry in Vivek Ramachandran. I got nothing but good things to say about the guy. He's absolutely probably the most technical person I've ever run into. He's flat out the smartest guy I know. I love he's the most methodical teacher. Everything is logical, methodical, pragmatic. Everything follows a good structured learning path. And then beyond that, he's just a sincere friend. I love him to death. I got nothing but great will for the guy, man. I wish you all the best, Vivek. I hope Pentester Academy keeps growing, and I hope it dominates the industry. I think what you're doing here is a good thing, great price. And for all the Pentester Academy customers, I wish you all the best. I hope you stay with Pentester Academy and keep learning, keep growing, and go out and spread the word about Pentester Academy. Share how much this is helping you, because I know if you're watching all these videos, you're getting better. And if you're getting better, do the right thing and pay it forward. Let the world know how good Pentester Academy is. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys on our next video series.